Evening all. Doing a sound check here with the new machine. Looks like you all can hear me. Welcome back, everybody. Hope you had a good August off, good recess. And with that, I will call the meeting to order. Starting with the land acknowledgments. City of Albany recognizes that we occupy the land originally protected by the Confederated villages of Lishan. We acknowledge the genocide that took place on these lands and must make strides to repay the moral debt that is owed to this indigenous people, specifically the Ohlone tribe. We thank them for their contributions, which have transformed our community and will continue to bring forth growth and unity. The City of Albany commits to sustaining ongoing relationships with the tribe and together build a better future for all that now make this their home. City Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Councilmember Gary?
Here.
Councilmember McQuaid?
Here.
Councilmember Nason?
Here.
Vice Mayor Tiedemann?
Here.
And Mayor Jordan?
Here. Thank you, City Clerk. The next item is a resolution allowing for meetings by video and teleconferencing. I don't know if this needs a staff report, but if staff has a report, please feel free to proceed.
This is just a regular routine item that we put on every 30 days. And because we have the August recess, we are putting this item up at the very beginning of the agenda so that we can proceed as we normally do.
Very
Mayor,
good.
would you like a motion to approve the resolution?
Actually, first I'm going to, but I do appreciate that. First, going to go check and see if there's any member of the public who's attending and would like to comment. I do see one hand raised. There are currently 19 attendees. Welcome.
Hi. So I was going to speak during public comment later. This is Chris Knight, co-president of Albany Teachers Association, but thank you, Mayor Jordan. This will be a great time. So I just want to thank everyone who responded to my emails during your August recess. I know that we all need a break, and that was appreciated. I'm calling in right now in support of opening city council chambers that the Albany School Board can meet in person. So not requesting that you all are meeting in person, but I am requesting that the city council chambers be open so that the Albany School Board can use them. The city council chambers are the only location where the school board can cost effectively provide the benefits of both virtual and in-person meetings. Virtual meetings provide access, but we've learned over the last 2 years that there is no match for in-person communication. So I just want to thank all of you for your work to make these facilities available to the school board as soon as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I see another hand has gone up. City Clerk. Welcome.
Hi. Hi there. Can you hear me? This is Becky Hopwood.
Yes, we can.
Hi, I'm a candidate for the Board of Education this year, and I was a parent in the district for 18 years until recently. And I just wanted to echo what Chris said just now about the necessity of resuming in-person school board meetings for the reasons that he outlined, but also to mention that I recently attended an AOSD administration and Board of Education workshop, which was held in person at Ocean View School. And I was struck by the cooperative, collegial atmosphere, which was in stark contrast to the lack of civility often present in the last 2.5 years of Zoom meetings. Obviously, you know, the City Council should continue to hold its remote meetings if that's your preference, but I would urge your members to allow the Board of Education to hold its public meetings in person in the Council chamber. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I see another hand. City Clerk. Welcome.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Wonderful. This is my first time commenting, so apologies. This is Melissa Boyd. I am a member of the school board, and I, like the previous callers in, am showing my support and making a request that the school board be able to meet in person. I agree with the increasing of community and civility if we're able to actually see each other face to face. And I also just want to show support and solidarity for our students and our staff and teachers who have been back in person for quite a long time now. We're trying to return to as normal of a life as we can. And I think that being able to conduct our school board meetings in person is an important part of that. We have looked into other ways to try to do it just from a school standpoint, and it's a great expense to try to have the sort of access that we've grown accustomed to, and making sure that all of our community members can fully participate in those meetings in whatever way they feel comfortable. So if possible, to be able to conduct our meetings in person at City Hall as they used to, that would be really wonderful and I think important for the community. Thank you for giving me a chance to talk.
Thank you, Trustee Boyd. And there is another trustee. Hello, welcome.
Hello. I was also going to speak during public comment, but perhaps this way you can all have a little discussion. We would really like, this is Veronica Davidson, sorry, trustee on the school board. We would really like to meet in person, or at least have the option to meet in person without an added cost or time commitment from our district that would take away from students learning. And our priority is the kids, but we would really like to be able to go back in person. As you've heard, it's just a much better environment for us as a board, and we really need the city to allow us to be back in there. And I think also we need to continue working together in partnership. So some needs are different. I think city council, if that works for you to keep meeting remotely, that's fantastic. But for us, we would ask that you please make this consideration and let us meet in person in the council chambers. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Davidson. Welcome.
Good evening. Yeah, this is Jeremiah. Yeah, I'm all for in person, of course. You know, that's what it's all about. It's more personal. But you know, what if someone still has COVID? Let's say a council member does get COVID, and they can't come to the meeting because of that, right? Which could happen. So let's say we move back to in-person meetings and a council member tests positive for COVID. Well, there should be the option for, if a council member or commissioner or committee member, someone that's on board of something, if they do test positive for COVID, then they should have a right to still do virtual meeting, which would allow the council to still make quorum. Because if we set ourselves up for 100% one way, we could be setting ourselves up for failure. And we don't want to do that in Albany. We want to set ourselves up for success no matter what happens. So I think it would be great if we could do a combination of in-person, so priority number one. The city council member, for some reason, does test positive. That way this council member can still participate and attend. That way that council member that tests positive for COVID, they could still stay home, self-quarantine, and be on virtually. So that's a solution right there. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And with that, I don't see any more hands raised. There's 32 attendees, which does include some staff, but I can't go through and count staff and subtract, so I'll just let you know there's that many attendees at the moment. City staff, I don't know either now or maybe this could be handled in the city manager's report, your preference, some prognosis on returning to in-person might be valuable.
Sure, Mayor. Thank you for asking that question. The city staff is working with the school district staff, and I'm regretful that the folks that called in aren't aware of that information. But I can assure you that we have been working with them for some time on a transition back to in-person using the City Hall Council chambers. I anticipate that that return will occur in September. However, it really would be up to school district staff in terms of their capacity to train and get equipped for that transition. There is some behind the scenes work to it, but we are making all efforts to help them return back in September.
Thank you. And the question was raised in a scenario where a council member or a member of another body would otherwise need to attend remotely, such as if they contracted SARS-CoV-2 or got COVID. I can't remember the status of the law. I know it's been in flux around that. I mean, obviously that was allowed before, but the noticing requirements were a bit onerous. I can't recall if that has changed or not.
Mayor, if we continue to adopt the AB 361 resolution, but still meet in person, if a council member or another member of a commission did get COVID, or it would need to be COVID specific, not another illness, but COVID, or maybe have significant exposure to it, that individual, if they wanted to attend, could attend without having their name or having their address on the agenda. Otherwise, we'd have to use the old Brown Act rules, pending if the new bill gets approved by the governor. And they would have to list their address on the agenda and have their location be available to the public.
So those were the old rules, as I recall them. Is there's a bill on the governor's desk to change that to? Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, there's a bill on the governor's desk to allow for limited use of teleconference videoing without putting a person's address on the agenda. But it's very limited in terms of how often it can be used.
Okay, thank you very much. And before we go to the resolution, maybe it's useful to take this opportunity to hear from other council members for this body's sake, what your interest is in going forward in terms of returning in person or staying in virtual meetings for now. If anybody has a strong thought one way or the other. I don't think I'm. Yes, Vice Mayor Tiedemann.
Yeah, let's do it. We had one in-person meeting. It was great. And I understand why we couldn't do another one right after that. Cases started to go up again, but hopefully we'll get to do one soon. I know staff has been working on that / did a lot to make it possible to have that one meeting in person work with all of the technological aspects. So thanks be to them for figuring that out. And I hope that we can do that soon, as well as the school board.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Councilmember McQuaid.
Thank you. I'm just curious, a question for the city attorney. How far can we discuss this? This isn't, I mean, the agenda item seems to be adopting the resolution, not discussing whether we want to do it live or not.
Yes, and I would encourage you to probably adopt the resolution as soon as possible, because our ability to have a teleconference and video meeting is by adopting this resolution, and we're a tad, past the 50 days. So
I tried.
Fair enough.
You did try.
We can potentially take this up at future agenda items. It might be reasonably appropriate at that time. So with that, is there a motion?
So moved.
Well, thank you.
Okay. It has been moved and seconded. Yes? Okay. You just get to what the actual resolution is here. So resolution 2022-93 to allow continuing to meet by video and teleconference has been moved by Councilmember Nason and seconded by Councilmember McQuaid. City Clerk, would you please poll the council?
Yes. Councilmember McQuaid?
Yes.
Councilmember Nason?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Tiedemann?
Yes.
Councilmember Gary?
Yes.
Mayor Jordan?
Yes, thank you.
Motion carried.
That takes us to City Manager report.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a statement to read regarding the cross on Albany Hill and some action that has taken place. On April 4th, 2022, the City Council unanimously voted to pass Resolution 2022-32 to acquire an easement held by the Albany Lions Club to maintain a cross located in Albany Hill Park. Thereafter, the city initiated an eminent domain lawsuit to acquire the easement. As part of the litigation, the city filed a motion for prejudgment possession, which allows the city to obtain possession of the property and remove the cross prior to a final judgment being entered into the lawsuit. On August 30th, the court issued its ruling granting the city's motion to obtain possession of the property and remove the cross. Pursuant to the court's order, the city can remove the cross from Albany Hill Park after October 4th, 2022. A few more announcements for the council and members of the community, and welcome back from your August recess. I know recess does not mean free time, so I respect all the work you've been doing during the month. And as mentioned, as part of a trailer on your previous agenda item, staff is working and has been working through August to ideally get the city council meetings back to in-person for your next meeting on September 19th. That's an ongoing target, and signs are looking like it's workable, as relative as it can be in the environment that we find ourselves within. But more information to come on that shortly. As you will see in your agenda tonight, a resolution or a proclamation has been provided. Thank you, Councilmember McQuaid, regarding National Preparedness Month, which falls upon us here in September. And I think we're all realizing how many types of issues we can experience in our world, including heat waves. So with that said, please take some time during September to get you, your family, your loved ones, and community prepared. We have a number of resources. These include simple items and some that are a little more difficult, but not impossible. Sign up for AC Alert. This is an opt-in to receive official city notifications related to emergencies, critical in the event of an evacuation order, warnings, or advisories, and really at your fingertips through our website. Also, Know Your Zone is related to AC Alert, but a way to actually know the area you're within in Albany, as our public safety experts have organized our city into zones to help ease with evacuations and other targeted messaging. You can find these at readyalbany.org. This is the house where a website house where we are storing all of this disaster preparedness information, and very user-friendly website here, which I appreciate all the work that's gone into this on an ongoing basis by staff. Also packing a go bag, something that you can grab quickly and go with your key essentials in it. That's included here under emergency kits, so you can walk through and figure out exactly what that means to you. And we do have a virtual evacuation event coming up on October 2nd. We will be performing a live drill using AC Alert and Zone Haven. So you see it here under events, and you can sign up to participate in this drill. And please expect more information to come through our different outreach channels on these available opportunities and the upcoming drill. We do have some cooling centers open today in Albany, and those include our community center and the senior center. They are listed on our website here as well. A thank you to the community that joined us for our concert in the park on August 27th. The band was called the Cheese Balls, and it was a very energetic, fun time in the park, including some local food trucks to make the event a little more whole and enjoyable for all. We have another concert coming up in case you missed that one or you want more on Saturday, September 24th. And this band will be the Rooster Rock and Roll from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. So another great event coming up. Albany Cares is just completed its 8th month distributing healthy groceries and essential household items to low-income individuals and families in Albany. The program continues to steadily grow each month. 107 grocery bags and 135 essential item bags were handed out last Friday. In total, the program has distributed over 500 grocery bags and over 700 essential item bags. And as a reminder, this program is funded by the city's Rescue Plan Act funds of 2021 as authorized by the council. Our Friendship Club, which has our youth childcare program, had over 320 children participate in the program this summer, including art, science, engineering, games, and indoor and outdoor play. Recently, we've transitioned to the after-school program version of this during the school year with over 56 children registered in the program per month. It's a great local opportunity and serving kids in Albany. A reminder that the Solano Stroll and Strollish are this weekend. And a number of announcements from our Public Works Department. We have substantially completed phase 5 of the Sidewalk Repair program, which includes 48 locations throughout the city where sidewalks have been repaired. 2 sewer projects are also substantially complete for a total of over 14,000 feet of rehabilitated and renewed sewer lines. We coordinated with a number of outside agencies, Caltrans, Railroad, USDA, East Bay Mud, City of Berkeley, and Golden Gate Fields on these projects. We also completed a striping and signage project, which included a refresh of existing crosswalks and striping, as well as new striping and wayfinding signage for bicycle routes and boulevards, as recommended in the city's active transportation plan. Staff also did a number of summer park facilities refresh work. There are new grills at Ocean View Park, topped off sand at Memorial Park, and did the rubberized surface replacement and repairs at Memorial Park, Dartmouth Tot Lot, Ocean View Park, and Peggy Thompson Pierce Street Park, as well as Jules Terrace Park. A reminder during this super hot weather to please water your street trees on a periodic basis, especially the younger ones, to help them survive this dry period. You can visit our constructions alert page, albanyca.org/construction-alerts, and sign up for e-news and e-notify for the most up-to-date information on project history and current status. On Albany Hill, we are doing some tree felling. The city has started a pilot project on the declining blue gum eucalyptus on Albany Hill, suffering from pathogen attack and drought. Several trees have died or are nearly dead and create a potential fire and safety hazard to park users and nearby structures. We have partnered with CAL FIRE National Guard hand crews who will be working to fell about a dozen dead eucalyptus trees along the Crest Fire Road and the trail on the north side of the hill. Cutting them down will not only reduce hazardous conditions, but also reduce the potential for fires that may harm wildlife on the hill. To ensure public safety of the park during this time, certain areas will be closed while the felling and milling of the trees take place. You can find out more information or contact our Public Works Department with any questions on that work. Upcoming event, Coastal Cleanup Day is September 17th. Join the City of Albany, the Watershed Project, and the Albany Landfill Dog Owners Group, ALDOG, for a waterfront cleanup on Saturday, September 17th from 9 to noon. This is always a loved event. Remember to wear sturdy shoes, hat and sunscreen, and help us clean up our beloved waterfront area. The fall activity guide should have hit mailboxes in August. You can also see it included on our website, and it is full of events and activities for the fall period. Regrets, that was a little longer than usual. Granted, we've had a month to not share information through this mechanism, so thank you for your patience and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for all the information, City Manager. If anyone attending would like to ask a question about or comment on the manager's report, please press your raise hand button. You will have 1 minute. If you are on the phone, please press your raise hand by pressing *9. Note this is for questions and comments on the City Manager's report only. If you have comments on matters not on the agenda, the time for those is next. In this and all comments and questions during the meeting, please address the council, not other attendees, and respect each person that has spoken. The council wants everyone to feel comfortable speaking and not be intimidated by others' comments or reactions. And I see there are, welcome.
Yeah, welcome. Thank you. It's Jeremiah here. So you mentioned you're going to fall some trees on Albany Hill. You know, I attend the Parks and Rec meetings, and the arborists, they're supposed to do bird nest studies in every single tree before you fall a tree. Also, has anybody checked for monarch butterflies? I thought they're kind of an endangered species, and now you want to cut down their habitat. Also, there are certain months out of the year to where it's illegal to fall any tree. So I don't know what's going on between Albany and Berkeley cutting down trees, you know, but both cities are cutting down trees right now, and all these trees that these two cities are cutting down matter. It's like you don't care about butterflies, you don't care about the birds nesting. And who's going to cut down the trees? Public Works? Also, I want to mention, hello?
Yes, thank you. Your time is up.
Oh, can I just mention one more thing, please? It'll be real quick.
Save it for public comment, please?
Okay, yeah, I could do that. Good suggestion.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Brian Martin. I wanted to really thank the City Council for its work to remove the cross. That's great news to hear. The City and Lions Club have said before the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals that they agree with the lower court's ruling that the cross is unconstitutional in our public park. I thank this and the prior City Council, the one immediately before, to work to right the wrongs of prior City Councils before them, who had improperly worked in the 1970s, 1980s to establish and keep the symbol of one preferred religion on public land. Lions Club is not a church. Its members, before and after this ruling, are free to worship as many or as few gods as they wish. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And as always, question potential for comment for city staff, which I understand if staff's not prepared to comment on it, but question was raised about birds and monarchs and the particular blue gum trees that would be felled for the reasons that were explained. I don't know if you have any information.
Sure, Mayor. Yeah, I will repeat, as stated through a number of staff to date, all of the work done on Albany Hill is closely coordinated with our naturalist, Stu Weiss, who advises on the habitat restoration and protection efforts required for both the monarch and other endangered or at-risk species on the Hill, including this work that I mentioned this evening.
Thank you. On to Good of the City. This is for attendees to provide the council comments, information, and questions on an item that is not on the agenda. Please raise your hands now. By phone, again, is *9. By state law known as the Brown Act, the council cannot discuss items that are not on the agenda except under extraordinary circumstances. Rather, items raised may be referred to a future agenda or to staff for comment. Welcome back.
Yeah, thank you. You know what? It was kind of a bad suggestion, really, because I can't make a public comment on anything that's on the agenda. So it's kind of a catch-22 there. talking about the manager report during public comment. But, you know, I'll just send you an email. Anyway, what I really want to talk about is the homeless situation in Albany and Berkeley. You know, there's Harrison Street, 9th Street leading into the village. So what happened was Albany Cares, or City of Albany, gave Albany Berkeley Food and Housing, what was it, $1.5 million or $2.5 million to Berkeley Food and Housing. So there's a safe parking lot on Grayson in Berkeley, the 6th Street in Grayson. And that parking lot was supposed to be safe parking for people. I've talked to many people there. They've been there for over 6 months, and not one person has got housing. Whoever the housing coordinator is not doing their job. Now, that temporary safe parking ends this month. It's over this month. It's not a park. They're going to come back where they started, right back to Albany. Berkeley Housing is responsible for this. We keep giving them millions and millions of dollars for a temporary solution. You're seeing a rise in homeless on the streets that used to be intense on Harrison Street and 10th, Harrison Street and 9th. Now, all those people, food and housing, Albany Cares, 6 months ago to a year ago, they were put in hotels down by the Oakland Airport, the Radisson. Those hotels converted to homeless shelters. Now, people were being kicked out of those hotels. They're being kicked out of their shelters because of curfews, 10 o'clock curfews. And if you show up 1 minute late after a curfew, the security won't let you in. So a homeless person can't get into their house if they're 1 minute late to their curfew, and they got to sleep on the streets in front of their house. Whole situation's messed up. There's no oversight. There's nobody advocating for the homeless. You're going to see a rise in homeless people on the streets. That safe parking on Grayson is closing this month. It ends. And all these people are being kicked out of their hotel rooms. So my solution is underneath the overpass on Buchanan, there's that parking lot that nobody uses. We need to offer that for safe parking. We need to step up to the plate and offer safe parking in Albany. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hello, this is Mr. Starr. I just wanted to point out that the porta potties on the Greenway disappeared. That was sort of presented as an accomplishment at the beginning of pandemic, and I hope it wasn't just only pandemic effort, and that we could make public bathrooms available in Albany again. Thanks.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hi, this is Margie Marks. I just wanted to put in a positive word for Albany Cares, Carroll, and Berkeley Food and Housing. When we have referred people to them, the last person we referred to Berkeley Food and Housing, who was sleeping on the street in Albany near the community center, got housed within 3 days, temporary housing, and within 2 weeks was in a permanent apartment that he's been in for 3 months now. There's another client we're working with, a woman who lives in her car, parks in Safeway or different places on San Pablo. And Carol and Anne Marie and CARES have been very responsive to getting this person housed. And there's a lot of quirks with the person. There's a lot of personality things going on, paranoia, and they're really doing their best to work with her. And we really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hi, I wasn't planning on speaking tonight, but hearing Jeremiah and Jim Beller, I just wanted to reiterate that I think Albany should be doing more. about supporting people who are experiencing homelessness. And also, I'm surprised to hear that the porta potty has been moved. I know that the one that was in the parking lot of the community center was removed, the hand washing sink and the porta potty. I would like to see that replaced also. I'm surprised that the city wouldn't want to be supporting people who might be needing a porta potty. And then I also wanted to express my concern again. I think I probably brought it up before about the oversized vehicle, the anti-homeless oversized vehicle ordinance that Albany has posted, where you can't park your vehicle if it's over a certain size. And I remember asking about it, being told that it was a complaint-driven ordinance. In other words, nobody's going up and down the streets looking for large vehicles, because there are probably homeowners in Albany who own large vehicles and also live in a house. So it's based on people who are housed, complaining about people who are unhoused, sleeping in their vehicles. And I'm really sorry also to see that sign. I feel like the whole impression that one would get if you were experiencing homelessness and visiting Albany would be that you are not wanted. And there are all these subtle and not so subtle ways that you're being told that. And I wish that Albany would do better and not be presenting such a hostile and unsupportive approach. Thank you.
Thank you. Not seeing any other hands raised. I will refer the issue again, comment or not prepared to comment, understandably, to staff regarding the portable toilets on the Greenway. I think I understand when and why those were no longer rented, but.
Mayor, I'll have to research that.
Okay, thank you, very good. Brings us to the consent calendar. Items on the consent calendar are considered to be routine by the City Council and will be enacted by one motion. By approval of the consent calendar, the staff recommendations will be adopted unless otherwise modified by the City Council. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless a council member or a member of the audience requests removal of the items from the consent calendar. Does any council member wish to pull an item? I am not seeing any indications. Does any attendee wish to pull an item? And if you do, please go ahead and comment on that item.
Yeah, I'll keep it simple tonight. Just 7-4, 7-6, 7-7, and 7-10, please.
4, 6, 7, 10?
Yep.
Okay. Why don't you go ahead and make your comments on those if you would?
Okay. So 7-4, thank you for everybody who's appointing people. I appreciate it. But I've noticed that Rochelle Mason has not appointed anybody to the Social and Economic Justice Commission since her person resigned back in February or March? And I'm just wondering what the delay is on that and why is she not appointing somebody? She's a council member and that's her duty. I'm just wondering what's going on there. It's almost been a year. Also, 7-6, you got a proclamation for Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. That's great. Proclamation. Where's the information to the public about suicide for prevention? Are there flyers at the community center? I mean, I don't even see any phone numbers to call here for mental health. You could at least post a phone number. It just looks like, okay, you got a proclamation and that's it. You should do a little bit more. 7-7, Proclamation National Preparedness Month. It's fires, a lot of fires. And I've talked to the fire department myself. There's been fires and smoke in the air, and the fire departments, they don't want to cry wolf. They don't want to send an alert. They don't want to overuse it. So, but I think folks in Albany deserve to know if there's smoke in the air or there's a fire, a brush fire down on the freeway twice in a row. I think that the fire department needs to work with CERT. If there's a fire, the fire department needs to notify CERT, and CERT should be able to notify every resident in Albany. Whoever signs up for CERT, there should be a relationship between the fire department and CERT That way, if the fire department's too scared to put up an alert because they don't feel like it, at least CERT would step up to the plate and let the public know that there is smoke in the air. So that way, elderly and people with breathing problems can at least close up their windows before it's too late. And number 10, appointment of the administrative officer. I'm just wondering who is the administrative officer? Please let me know who the administrative officer is. Let the public know, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Yeah, I'd like to, Clay Larson, I'd like to pull 7-9. I assume I'll comment now. I wanted to comment one more time on the Albany specific, San Pablo Avenue specific plan, in particular in this case, the changes to the municipal code that will implement that plan. And the impacts of the specific plan, in terms of the impacts of the specific plan, the city is relying on the 2016 general plan EIR and concluding that there are no impacts that aren't described in that general plan EIR. The EIR prepared for the 2016 general plan certainly evaluated the impact of the plan on neighborhoods. The EIR specifically noted the environmental standards such as building height, setbacks, daylight planes, and the general plan, and found that these zoning regulations preserve views, quoting from the plan, EIR, preserve views, maintain light and air, and protect aesthetic quality. The EIR called out the daylight plane regulations specifically, noting that the requirements that taller buildings step down in height as they approach property lines preserve privacy. Based on all these considerations, the EIR concluded that the general plan policies ensure that new development in Albany will fit within the scale and design, reading here, of existing neighborhoods and will not adversely affect the visual character of adjacent areas. The specific plan will not changes all the design standards that the general plan EIR referred to. Building heights are doubled, setbacks are cut in half, and the daylight plane requirements are eliminated. The impact of these changes was never evaluated during the planning process. And now the city's proposing no formal environmental review. I think the city is not justified in relying on the 2016 EIR. I would hope that some council member, and I think it would be wise for some council member to ask the city attorney for a legal opinion on the city's reliance on the 2016 EIR. I got a little time left. I also want to comment on one specific item in the ordinance itself. New section 202840A11, paragraph B, if you can find that, after setting the minimum parking requirements to 0, states that the maximum parking requirements are shown in table 4. However, table 4 lists minimum parking requirements. So I think there's a clarity issue here. I think that caused confusion on the part of Mr. Miller, item that comes up later, who didn't get in his density, San Pablo density evaluation didn't get the parking requirements correct. So I think you should clear up that issue. All right, and I would again encourage some member of the council to ask the city attorney for a legal opinion on their reliance on the 2016 EIR. Thanks.
Thank you. I guess not seeing any other members of the public who would like to comment. Councilmember Nason.
Since we're answering questions now to public comments, which I have some concerns about whether that's how we should be proceeding. But since we are proceeding that way, I would like to respond to Mr. Garrett Pinguelo's comment about my appointment to the SEJC. And I have expressed, I think, this previous. I feel that the SEJC at present is not properly trained and not properly conducting its meetings in two respects. One is we still have unaddressed the problem of a member of the SEJC referring to a group of people as vermin. And this is a kind of expression that goes beyond, I think the exact word was an infestation of a particular group of people. And I think that this goes beyond the bounds of what should be said in public meetings. It really goes beyond the bounds of what should be said in general. Speaking of human beings as a kind of vermin is a signal and a step towards exterminationist policy, and that is utterly unacceptable. The other is my impression that the SCJC has been a very difficult environment for staff to work in. And we have had abusive comments that, to my mind, go beyond legitimate critique of performance and going into abuse of staff members. And for these reasons, I would not serve on the SCJC, and I would not, and I will not, ask anyone else to do so until the council is ready to take some corrective action. I think it's a dreadful contradiction in terms to have a committee with the title SCJC that acts unjustly towards members of the public and unjustly towards members of the city staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Nason. Councilmember Gary.
Thank you, Councilmember Nason, for stating that and providing your explanation. So, Mayor, will you be appointing someone, as Councilmember Nason stated that she's not going to?
I think that's off the agenda topic. I will be potentially taking action going forward.
Okay.
But, yeah.
Just wanted clarity. Thank you.
Let's see. There was a question, who is the administrative officer? The administrative officer is the city manager. The title of the position varies between code and charter. And so that is another title for the position. I believe I have that correct. Staff will correct me if I see the city attorney nodding affirmatively. With that, I will just state again my understanding of the aesthetic analysis in the San Pablo Avenue specific plan. I see Director Bond is here, so hopefully he'll correct me if I have this wrong, that the aesthetic analysis is not based on a property by property analysis, but a view shed analysis. So there's some difference there. I know it can be confusing given the terms. I see Director Bond has his hand raised. Welcome.
There we go. Thank you. Mayor Jordan, you're correct that this California Environmental Quality Act is really looking for us to analyze situations where there be something like a scenic vista or a scenic highway, something like that would rise to the level of a CEQA aesthetic impact. But the situation in a fairly dense urban environment in itself doesn't trigger a potential CEQA significant impact. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, unless there's any further discussion, looking for a motion on the consent calendar. Councilmember Jerry.
So we didn't address 7-9. I think Mr. Lawson brought us some valid points, and I think those issues need to be addressed before we move forward with a motion. Thank you.
Would you like to raise which topic that he raised should be addressed?
Well, he asked that we ask the city attorney about some legal measures. I'm sure you were here like I am. So those issues that he brought up, I think they need to be addressed.
Well, I believe I just addressed one of them. So I don't know if there's another one that needs to be addressed. That's the one I chose to address.
Mayor, I can just briefly address that, staff did work with our office regarding the CEQA recommendation that the council took at a previous meeting, which was the addendum to the general plan EIR, and we do concur with that action that the council took. So we don't recommend taking any other additional actions related to CEQA.
Thank you, City Attorney. Yes, Councilmember Nason.
If a motion is in order, I would like to move the consent calendar.
And sorry, I will second, but I want to pull 7-9.
Councilmember Nason, do you accept the amendment?
Yes, I do.
Okay, it's been moved. The consent calendar less item 7-9. It's been moved by Councilmember Nason and seconded by Councilmember Gary. City Clerk, please poll the council.
Councilmember Nason?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Tiedemann?
Yes.
Councilmember Gary?
Yes.
Mayor Jordan?
Yes.
Councilmember McQuay?
Yes.
And the motion passes.
Thank you. Is there a motion on 7-9?
I'll move 7-9.
I'll second.
It's been moved. Consent calendar item 7-9 has been moved by Vice Mayor Tiedemann, seconded by Councilmember Nason. City Clerk, would you please poll the council?
Councilmember Gary?
No.
Mayor Jordan?
Yes.
Councilmember McQuay?
Yes.
Councilmember Nason?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Tiedemann?
Yes.
Motion carries.
You all. Brings the meeting to the first item of unfinished business, which regards submittal of the working draft of the housing element to the California Department of Housing and Community Development. A council has staff's report.
Jeff should be joining as panelist in the.
Yeah, thanks. Welcome back.
Good evening again, Council and Mayor Jordan. My name is Jeff Bond. I'm the Community Development Director. I'm going to wait a moment for our consultant, Barry Miller, to get up on the screen, and then I will start a brief staff report and then turn it over to him. Okay, good. I'm seeing Barry up on the screen now. Thank you. Our request this evening is the City Council authorize submittal of the working draft housing element to the California Department of Housing and Community Development. I'll give you some background, some of which Council is certainly very familiar with, but just in case there are people new to the process, I'd like to just briefly cover the process, the intent of the housing element and the process thus far and going forward. All cities in the Bay Area, all cities and counties in the Bay Area are required to complete a housing element portion of the general plan by January 2023. And each housing element must demonstrate that the city can accommodate its fair share of regional housing needs. And it also needs to include an analysis of housing opportunities and constraints, goals and policies, and programs to support housing production, housing preservation, and equity measures for people who in housing. Ultimately, our housing element must be approved by the state. That's somewhat unusual for most long-range plans where we have discretion on the content and process of our land use planning and transportation planning and so forth. This is a highly prescribed process. We initiated the preparation of the housing element more than a year and a half ago. We've had numerous planning and zoning commission meetings, a community workshop, several presentations to the city council. And an important milestone was reached at the end of July where we were able to complete the assemblage of first working draft of the housing element, which we then made available pursuant to state law for 30 days of comments. The draft was released on July 29th and the comment period ended on August 28th. I will say, however, that we continue to welcome engagement and comments and in any form that people wish. We're happy to attend meetings or have conversations with people one-on-one, whatever is appropriate and whatever people are comfortable with. The issues, so during the 30-day comment period, the city received quite a number of comments related to tenant protection measures. This discussion was included in the housing element because state law expressly requires us to reach out to protected classes under the Fair Housing Act, including low-income tenants and organizations, community-based organizations that represent them. The basis for some of the recommendations that were in the draft of the housing element. These issues are complex and require a great deal of outreach and discussion among City Council. Including these programs was not intended to bring closure to whether or not the city should pursue them, only to establish it as a program that the city will discuss this and will have those discussions in the coming years. Based on the comments received by the city over the past month, we have drafted some alternative language, which is attached to attachment 5 to your packet this evening, which the council could consider if it wished to reflect those comments that were received, many of them from people who own rental properties in town. Once the working draft housing element is sent to the state has 90 days to provide us written comments back. As I mentioned, during that time, we're happy to continue to talk with people in any format that people want to do that. We will continue to work on the draft. We anticipate having some discussions with HCD during the course of the 90 days. We'll also be looking at what other cities are experiencing, the feedback that other cities are getting from HCD, so that when we do finally get some comments back in December, we're ready to make some revisions to incorporate both HCD comments and any additional public input we receive, and hope to be bringing that back to council probably in early 2023. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Barry for some more detail on some of the edits that have been made. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff, and good evening, Mayor and Council members. I'm Barry Miller, consultant on the housing element. As Jeff mentioned, we provided a detailed presentation to the City Council on July 26th. At that point, we walked you through the chapters of the housing element and focused on the policies and more than 50 programs that are in the document. So in the interest of time, we won't be repeating that presentation tonight. We're going to focus instead on the comments that were received during the 30-day public review and the changes that we've proposed to the document since publication. As Jeff noted, the housing element was published on July 29th, beginning a 30-day comment period that closed on August 28th. We received 50 individual comments during that period. Those comments came in steadily over the 30-day period, but accelerated during the final week with 30 comments coming in during the last week of the 30-day period. 47 of those 50 letters were from landlords and rental property owners in Albany. These letters universally objected to the proposed programs 5C, 5D, and 5E in the draft plan. The 3 programs had been included in the draft in response to the state mandate to affirmatively further fair housing. Data from the needs assessment in the document on renter overpayment, which indicated that 25% of Albany renters are paying more than half of their incomes on housing, and input from community groups received at the Planning and Zoning Commission, the Social and Economic Justice Commission, council meetings, as well as a stakeholder meeting with tenant advocates. Briefly, Program 5C called for strengthening the rent mediation program to address some of the perceived shortcomings of the program and looking at other ways to assist tenants facing large rent increases. Program 5D called for a series of measures to be evaluated, intended to protect tenants from eviction, cover relocation expenses, limit tenant harassment, and avoid displacement due to steep rent increases. Program 5E called for consideration of a Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act, or TOPA program. The written feedback from landlords, as well as some of the oral comment that you received on July 26th, was that these programs were punitive to landlords and property owners. As a result of the input, we've proposed modifications to 2 of the programs and are recommending elimination of Program 5E, the TOPA program. That program was specifically mentioned in the council discussion on July 26th as an example of something that might be too ambitious to include in the document, given the large number of programs that were already in place and limited city staff and resources. The proposed changes to 5C and 5D are primarily intended to make sure that the perspective of property owners is considered as this discussion takes place in the future. It is not to table the discussion or to not consider tenant protection measures in the future. Much of the program content is still in place, but the language is more generalized, and there's a greater commitment to making sure that this is a balanced conversation. The intent of the programs is really to have a dialogue about tenant protection measures following adoption of the housing element, and to ensure that landlords and tenants are both at the table in that dialogue. The agenda packet includes the proposed edits. I'm happy to answer questions about that. I do want to point out that tonight's request is really to submit the document to the state for their review, not to adopt the document. It's possible that one of the comments we'll receive from the state is that this draft doesn't go far enough to respond to the issues around tenant protection. HCD may also ask for greater specificity and detail, and we can consider additional edits in December when we receive their comments. Again, I want to emphasize we're not recommending removal of these comments. We're recommending a balanced dialogue, and we're not listing out the specific prescriptive measures to be considered. There are a few other edits to the document that we wanted to alert the council to. Some respond to your own comments made at the July 26th meeting. For example, we've updated references to Everyone Home, the plan to end homelessness, to the Home Together plan, which is more recent. We've adjusted some of the specific language related to housing for persons with disabilities. We've included a definition of affordable housing. We've added a detailed table to Appendix B showing all of the housing sites in a specific format that has been requested by HCD, Housing and Community Development, to supplement the documentation that we've provided. There were also a few additional pieces of correspondence that have come in the last couple of days. And the city has received a number of emails from Albany Thrives Together and its representatives requesting that some of the deleted language be restored. You've also seen emails regarding the CEQA documentation of the housing element. I will add that we're in the process of preparing an addendum to the general plan EIR for this, and we'll be releasing that when we produce the public review draft later in the year. Again, tonight we're asking for authorization to submit the draft to HCD. They will have 90 days to review the documents, so we'll be looking for their comments in early December. At that point, we have roughly 2 months to revise the document and then bring it back for adoption, first with a hearing before the Planning and Zoning Commission, and then with a hearing before the City Council. Once we adopt the housing element, we still need to receive state certification. And adoption is not necessarily the end of the road. It's a long process, and I'll point out that now, a year after the Southern California jurisdictions were due to adopt their housing elements, only 15% of those jurisdictions have been found in compliance with the new state laws. So you may be hearing about this even after the element's been adopted, and we may yet need additional changes beyond adoption. So with that, Jeff and I are happy to answer questions about the revisions or other parts of the document and take your feedback. And again, we can edit the draft before it is submitted to HCD. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Thank you, Director Bond. Councilmember LaQuaid.
Thank you. I do have a question, a process question. When HCD returns to draft and they have their comments, are the only changes that were then allowed, do the only changes we could then make relate to their comments, or could we go, I don't want to say a totally different direction, but make a major change that doesn't reflect what they said? Am I making sense?
Yes.
Thank you.
And the answer is you can make additional changes. I think that if the changes strengthen the element, there's not going to be an issue. If the changes weaken the element or delete the program or something that they've reviewed and signed off on, that is where we can get into some problems. So, for example, adding a housing site, no problem. Taking away a housing site, potentially a problem. So it's that kind of dynamic, but you certainly can continue to edit the document after we get their comments.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Not seeing any. We'll take the meeting to public comments. There are currently about 25 attendees. I see 3 who have their hands raised. If others who wish to comment on this item could raise their hands at this time, I would be appreciative. I see 4 have their hands raised. All right, 5, 6, 7. Do I hear 8? All right, very good. We'll keep it at 3 minutes for an item of this magnitude. City Clerk, could you please admit the first commenter? Welcome.
Hi, this is Jim Beller again. I'm speaking on behalf of Albany Thrives Together Now, previously known as the Diverse Housing Working Group. I hope you all know a little about our work and our history of advocacy for a much more inclusive Albany. Our members were active in the public planning and zoning meetings leading up to the draft housing element. Barry and Jeff came to one of our monthly meetings as well. The final, quote, final draft before the last council meeting at least partially reflected our input, especially concerning renters' protections. Albany's landlords are very well organized. Of course they are. Having the status quo enforced pays them well, but to treat the volume of their dissatisfaction as a measure of the community's feelings does democracy a disservice. We at Albany Thrives Together know that any hope of real diversity in Albany will be in set aside low-income housing or protected renters. We can all agree that the number of subsidized homeowners will number in the dozens, but if we ignore protecting our many renters, every year more will be forced out by rising rents, buildings being sold, or even by evictions to raise the rent. Currently, the average family buying a home in the East Bay has an income of $250,000. That will be the same bracket as our average renters if we don't stand up for them now. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome back.
Good evening, everybody. Yeah, my name is Jeremiah. So Albany has what's called ECHO housing, right? And ECHO is an acronym for Eden Council for Hope and Opportunity. And they basically do all the tenant-landlord disputes. And the phone number for ECHO housing is 1-855-275-3246. On the Albany City's website, it says ECHO is committed to ending discrimination in housing by providing counseling, investigation, mediation, enforcement, and education through its fair housing program. It also says counselors conduct site investigations and enforcement in response to reports of housing discrimination complaints. If you have experienced or witnessed discrimination based on race, disability, children, national origin, religion, gender, or orientation or identity, marital status, source of income, or any other arbitrary characteristic, please call ECHO Housing at area code 855-275-3246. So ECHO Housing is great. And I think that the city of Albany needs to do more on publicizing the resources that we have available. I didn't hear anybody tonight talk about ECHO Housing at all. So I'm glad I did. Keep up the good work, everybody.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hi, this is Margie Marks. I'm calling on behalf of myself. I'm disappointed and angry about the latest changes in the housing element. The tenant protections and anti-displacement measures were already weak, calling for considering or evaluating, not enacting any real protections. With this new draft, it looks as though the city has taken out even the weak considering or evaluating. I have 2 questions. It appears that whatever the landlords don't even want out in public just to discuss were removed. Any mention of a possible ordinance was taken out because landlords, after all, don't want any more regulations. I could have told you what the landlords would say, as I know they could tell you what I will say. My question is, you housing experts, knowing the landlords would object and even knowing what they would say, why did the authors of the housing element even suggest proposals for renters when you removed them all after getting letters from 47 landlords? You saw the need to placate them at the expense of the majority cost burden renter population. Did you just remove everything so you could throw tenants a bone by putting a couple possible protections back in? My second question is for the council. Something I just do not understand is how the council can sit back and do nothing. Look at the numbers. The numbers don't lie. Over 50% of renters are cost burdened and over 25% are severely cost burdened, which means they spend more than 50% of their monthly income on rent. That is approximately 1,600 households in Albany. Can any of you council members imagine spending more than 50% of your monthly income on housing? I guess you can't because you don't want to do anything about it. Do you have no empathy for people of lower income who want to live and thrive here? When you look at the numbers of renters of color who are cost burdened, how can you do nothing? Over 70% of the Black population is cost burdened, 45% of Asians are cost burdened, and 50% of Hispanic households are cost burdened. You all have a duty to affirmatively further fair housing. I honestly do not understand how an elected person can look at the numbers and choose to do nothing. Renters make a lot of sacrifices to live here. We should support them. The program that you took out that really angered me the most was the program that would allow tenants to buy a property if it's being sold. That's such a small program that probably would have helped maybe 5 people in Albany over the 8 years of the housing element, but it would have been people that live in apartments that couldn't afford to buy a home, but through TOPA, they could. So we would get more low, but you don't, the landlords don't even want to talk about that. They think 5 people being able to buy, 5 poor people being able to buy homes here is going to disrupt their business. I'm sorry, but I'm very angry about this and I wish you would change it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Brian Martin. I am commenting primarily about the affirmatively furthering fair housing, which is a mouthful to say. My understanding from previous meetings was that the poor pass rate that you heard for Southern California cities was in large part due to cities not properly addressing that segment. And so I pointed out in an email a number of concerns that this application would be stronger if they could be made now or during a revision as needed. And so, for example, briefly to identify the Solano Avenue corridor as be more aggressive there. The city council was extremely aggressive with San Pablo Avenue. It's my understanding, and I asked the staff to correct me if I'm wrong, that 9 stories with state density bonus can now be built up and down San Pablo by right with 0 parking spaces required, and that 12 stories are now can be built by right with 0 parking spaces required on San Pablo Avenue, even though the documentation the city is providing for this housing element says that the San Pablo Avenue corridor is the least affluent, the least white, the most diverse, the lowest air quality, and was impacted by redlining in a yellow region in the 1930s. So yet we have 1600 Solano Avenue wasn't even identified as an opportunity site. And so, which indicates that the city is too conservative there. And my understanding is that it still wouldn't be identified under the current guidelines for opportunity sites. So too conservative on Solano Avenue. Also, where it specifically says that measures that facilitate duplexes should be followed. Why not make it 4plexes? It's just the statement simply says the city will also study potential changes. It doesn't say the city will enact this or that. So why not study potential 4plexes? So that's something I don't get throughout. That would increase the equity to share the burden across the city and not just in one neighborhood on San Pablo Avenue. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. I have, like Margie Marks, I'm very concerned about the changes, and I did write a email, but here's the things I wanted to say. For starters, the idea of having a balanced conversation with people that are in power and people that aren't in power is ridiculous. And the metaphor that I came up with is if we wanted, when Albany was segregated, and somebody came up with the idea of not having segregated housing anymore because Albany used to be segregated. And then the city would say, well, we've heard from 47 landlords who want to keep it segregated, and we've only heard from 3 renters. So we should have a balanced conversation. It should be a balanced conversation. You can't have a balanced conversation when there's a group of people that are in power and then other people who don't have power, especially if they're renters. They don't want to rock the boat. They don't know what the landlord will do. The landlord could raise the rent to anything they want. The landlord could kick them out. And that's why we need at least to have conversations about rent stabilization versus this rent mediation, which has no teeth whatsoever. The timer is not going, so it's somewhat unnerving. I was like, the timer, like, okay. So I don't know how much time I have left because the timer isn't moving. I also want to ask what are the landlords afraid of? Are they afraid that they won't be able to just raise the rent as high as they want? Are they afraid they won't be able to just kick somebody out randomly? I mean, what are they afraid of? If it's fair, it's not like just cause eviction is just cause eviction. It's not saying the landlord can't kick somebody out or evict somebody for just cause. And rent stabilization is saying a landlord can't just decide to raise their rent $500 a month just because they feel like it. So it's all reasonable. And it's all something that should be evaluated and considered. And then Margie Marks's point about the people being able to buy houses is just the idea of saying you're going to remove that because you don't have enough city staff to do it. There's not enough time. Like Margie, I think I'm just more amazed that the city, rather than seeing an opportunity to actually think about what is happening to our city, which is this increased gentrification, increased housing prices, and what's going to do the diversity of our city. And instead of saying, this is not right, we don't want our city to go in that direction. We have a vision, and our vision is this is not going to happen. And in fact, we're going to make it more welcoming, more welcoming to people who have lower incomes, more welcoming to people of color, making it more possible for other people to live here besides rich white people. That's what we need, a vision. And instead what you're saying is we like the status quo, and we had 47 letters from landlords, so therefore we have to listen to the landlords. And another question, I have 2 more questions. One is, if you had heard from 47 tenants, would that have changed it? Like, is that because the 47 tenants didn't get together and write you letters? And then my final question is HCD, if you send it off the way it is now and HCD just accepts it, would it just stay the same? You're talking about revision, but what if they say, oh, this looks good? Then would you just leave it the way it is? Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Yeah, I'm Peter Campbell, and I have 4 rental apartments that I rent out in Albany. And I'd like, first of all, to commend the council or whoever worked on this plan for your consideration of the comments that you received. I appreciate that you took the time. I guess that's your job, but I guess that you took the time to read the comments and consider them and incorporate them into the revisions of the plan. With regards to a couple of the comments that have made, I think protecting tenants is important, but I think it's important to protect them in a way that is the right way. And the right way is not to penalize the people who are providing the housing. The provision of housing is a business, just like a grocery store, or just like a shoe repair shop, or just like a chiropractor or whatever. It's a business, and to penalize the business to protect a particular class of people doesn't seem right to me. And I hope that you would agree with that. I mean, if I had a sore back and I didn't have an adequate income to pay for a chiropractor, would the chiropractor be obliged to provide me with free services or reduced rate services or subsidized services just because I couldn't afford to pay for it? I think the same rationale applies in the case of a tenant. So if you're going to protect tenants and help them with their rent, do it the right way. Provide a fund for it so that the city can help them financially in that regard. And finally, the concept of being afraid of the landlord, I think that's a sad situation. If a tenant is afraid of their landlord, there's something wrong more than just whatever. They don't talk to the landlord, or they don't know the landlord, or whatever. It's expensive to get a tenant out. You don't just evict a tenant for no reason. You have to have a good reason to evict a tenant. It doesn't make business sense to do it otherwise. Raising the rent $500 or $1,000 or whatever, you can't do that. You have to be within the market. The market controls what you can actually charge on a rent. You can't just willy-nilly raise a rent to whatever you want as a property provider. So once again, thank you for your work, and I appreciate your consideration of the comments that you've received. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hello, my name is Chris Moore. I'm a board member on the East Bay Rental Housing Association. Appreciate the changes in the new arena update. Just a couple comments. Rental protections, they're generally a sound good policy. They can be important, but the way they've been implemented in cities like Oakland and Berkeley and San Francisco, where there's little landlord, or also should be called housing provider, little input from them. And over time, you get a situation that's actually bad for renters and bad for housing providers. It typically drives up the cost to operate and to provide housing, and that in the end causes it's a higher cost to renters ultimately. I think as you consider implementing rental regulations or rental policy, you should talk to Mayor Tom Budd over in the city of Richmond. He just made a statement about a month ago in a city council meeting. The rental properties have declined, rental units have declined since they implemented rent control in that city. I think you should talk to the Berkeley Property Owners Association in Berkeley. The largest evictor in the city of Berkeley, it's a study a few years back, was the not-for-profits that are providing the housing. It's not the mom and pop housing providers. Also, it would be important to just look at the data. If you look at the RENA housing data in cycle 5, all cities in the 9 Bay Area counties that have just cause and rental protections, they are only at 71% of their RENA housing targets. The primarily area that they're falling short is lower income, moderate income housing. All non-just cause cities have reached 108% of their RENA goals. So there's something going on there. The more rental restrictions you have, the less development that you typically have or interest in your city. The facts and the data do not support the typical antidotes that are provided by tenant rights organizations. So my point is, and this is something they don't do in Berkeley or Oakland or San Francisco, is bring in the housing provider early at the inception of any policy and make sure you do understand the impacts from both sides. And so the last thing is just a point, and I got 28 seconds here. You use the term landlord. Alameda County supervisors and other cities are beginning to use the term housing provider. Landlord's an intentionally derogatory term from feudal times. There are no lords in America. It's not in the Constitution. We provide housing. Landlord is also offensive to women. Many housing providers in general are women. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Council. I am Nick Pilch. I'm Chair of the Planning and Zoning Commission. Speaking for myself, I'll also know that I am a landlord, or if you will, a housing provider, although not in Albany. I'm disappointed about the process here. My understanding was that after the last planning and zoning meeting where we signed off on the draft to be submitted to the state, that there wouldn't be any substantive changes before it went to the council. And I don't understand why there are. I would think that the council would want to send this back to planning and zoning where all the other public feedback was obtained before bringing it back to the council for final approval and perhaps small modifications. During the process, I rarely recall any comments from the landlords or housing providers, except for a representative from one organization, whereas Albany Thrives Together and other advocates did speak up and had ongoing comments in multiple meetings. We may choose not to implement some of these ideas after considering these policies, and the devils certainly are in the details, I agree, but it's premature to remove only clauses that protect renters and alarming. The optics of making these substantive changes, which hurt only renters, listening to mostly representative of housing providers, is very disturbing and alarming. As was pointed out, renters are folks with almost no power and agency. I ask that you submit the document as approved by Planning and Zoning, or send it back to Planning and Zoning for further work before submittal back to the council and then to the state. I do believe it is sad that we do not provide medical services for those who can't afford it. And as a society, I think we should. I think we should have single payer medical care. And likewise, I think we should be doing all as we can as a society to realize that providing housing is a very serious business and should be taken very seriously. And the people who rent, their concerns are some of the most serious. Everyone has a right to housing and a right not to be thrown out on their stoop. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hello, good evening, council members. My name is Saya, and thank you for allowing me to speak. There are just a few things that actually more than a few things that bother me about some of the comments that were made earlier. It's so easy to make a bunch of accusations of how we go about renting apartments and what it's like being a landlord or a housing provider or even a property manager. Just a few things I wanted to clear up. 1482 prevents steep increases and has since 2016-17, when the rent control issue became an explosive issue in California. You can't evict to raise the rent. That's just not allowed. Even when you were able to provide a 30-day notice, it had to be for a reason. Echo Housing is everywhere. It's on the county website. Echo Housing is a part of the county. And I just wanted to say that 50% of the applications that we receive blow the doors off of our financial and economical qualifiers to actually rent an apartment, and in most of Albany. And all of the rents are generally about the same and competitive with El Cerrito and Richmond. In fact, El Cerrito and Richmond seem to be outpacing Albany in terms of how high a rent can, how much you can actually rent a 1, 2, and a 3 for. I think a lot of the big sort of the lack of housing that's going on in the housing market here in Albany is you have a lot of the people who are moving over from the Peninsula area, the Silicon Valley area. They're able to sell their homes for $3 to $5 million and come to an excellent school district. And that's what Albany really provides for most of the families you see here. It's rated 10, 10, 10 all the way through. Who doesn't want their child to go? It's really to go to a school like that. That's rated so high in test scores. So what you're seeing is a lot of people who are no longer wanting to pay those property taxes, and it really doesn't matter if they go into the office over at Facebook and Google, purchasing over here because the home price is lower, the school district is excellent, and Albany is excellent. So it's really not a matter of anybody discriminating. I mean, we've got Fair Housing, the DFEH in Sacramento, is actually quite a strong force. Their investigators will grill you like a cheeseburger under a heat lamp over any allegations that's thrown at you. I've been there before and have had to prove innocence. And yes, it does cost an exorbitant amount of money to try and defend yourself as a landlord. I don't find that derogatory, actually, but or a housing provider. I feel like a housing provider, the term housing provider, sort of puts me into a more sort of, I don't know how to say it, but thank you very much for the floor. I appreciate it. Please don't tell me how to do my job, folks. And also don't accuse me of things that I'm not guilty of. I'm not a villain. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Chris King. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. I wanted to just give a couple of examples of what it's like to being a housing provider. And I want to express my support for the document in its current version, which I think is a very balanced version. So I am a small scale housing provider with 1 unit in Oakland and a duplex in Albany. I was renting an apartment. My apartment lease expired and the company wanted to raise the rent by 10%. So I wanted to move into my own property and I was not allowed to do that. And another example is within Albany itself, the amount that property taxes go up each year is actually higher than the amount that I've been allowed to increase my rent. Now that's been, when I say allowed, that's because of market forces. So I haven't been able, I wouldn't want to have high rent increases anyway, but keep them, in the 2-3% kind of range, which is necessary to keep competitive with the market. And that's actually, like I said, my property taxes exceed the increase in those exceeds that increase in rent. So anyway, I think it's a balanced proposal. I think Jeff and is it Barry did a good job on putting the document together. And I think we need tenant protections and we need protections for housing providers. Otherwise, they'll pull out of the market. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hi, good evening. Good evening, and thank you very much for your service. This is Elaine Stelton, and I'm just speaking for myself tonight. I am writing to you, or I'm just going to read a letter that I wrote but submitted after August 28th. I am writing to you because of a clause in the housing element that it would allow would not allow a housing provider to consider a tenant's eviction history. I have been a tenant for more years of my life than I have been a landlord. I can think of 7 landlords or property managers in apartments or homes where I lived off the top of my head. My relationship with these individuals varied over time and circumstances. But in one specific circumstance, I was asked to leave within a very short period of time. So I do understand what it is to receive a 30-day notice. However, as the expression goes, if you want to understand someone, try walking in their shoes. Since I've been both a tenant and a property manager, I can see the necessity of knowing someone's eviction history, and it has major safety ramifications for the people who live in close proximity to them. For example, when I became a property manager, I found that one of my tenants was using a blowtorch to remove paint from his cabinets. I was fortunate. I did not have to evict this resident for fear of him burning down the building, which housed at least 10 other people, including children. If I had had to go through the entire eviction process, it would have cost me between $10,000 and $25,000. And if tenant activists had their way, I would have had to have paid for his legal expenses on top of mine. All these expenses would have been incurred because I did not want to risk their lives, the lives of my tenants. Please consider everyone in Albany when you write the laws. It is crucial to everyone's safety. Thank you very much for your time and your service.
Thank you. Not seeing any other hands raised. Bring it back to council. Council members, Vice Mayor, do you have any? Well, I see Councilmember Gary has her hand raised.
Thank you, Mayor. This question is for Mr. Miller. Thank you for coming back with this. But I know the last time we met in July, I asked about outreach to renters and what that would look like, and if that happened, and what was the response? Were the renters marketed to have this discussion, to get their feedback? So if you can just enlighten me on that.
Sure. Yeah, we did outreach to renters primarily through Albany Thrives Together and through our overall outreach program. There was not a specific focus group or stakeholder meeting just with renters alone. I think we had several workshops and meetings with the Planning and Zoning Commission where there were renters present, and so that was primarily the way we got input. It was kind of the same approach that we took for other groups in the community.
If I may add, Councilmember Gary, shortly after the beginning of the 30-day period, I did send an email to some of the county-wide organizations that are representing tenants. I don't remember the number of groups there were, at least half a dozen or so maybe. And Barry may remember the number better than I, but anyhow, I did reach out to those groups. I didn't receive any responses from them, but invited them to look at the document and reach out to me if they had any comments or questions.
Yeah, there were about 24 organizations on that list.
But specifically in buildings that are on Solano and other areas where there's renters, you didn't receive a huge number of responses? Or did you mail out to those farms? I guess, with the numbers, it's not adding up. If over half of our community are renters, I receive more emails from the landlords versus the tenants. So I'm just trying to see, what did we miss, or what was missed, and how can we make sure that every voice is being heard in the community?
Yeah, I think it speaks to the need for greater, for more organization of tenant groups. There is some movement to create the tenant union and so forth. We reached out to the Albany Tenants Union, but there wasn't, as part of this process, there wasn't a direct outreach to individual renters or property owners.
Now, if that was the case, do you think this conversation would have been different? I mean, because if you think about the current group that you reached out to, they just started, and there's a long time renters here. So a lot of the renters don't know that group exists, so I think it would be premature if we're saying that this document is balanced if all renters here didn't have either the opportunity or even conduct a survey through the mailer. I know a lot of renters don't want to come forth because they are afraid that they're going to be retaliated against. And so, could there have been other ways that we could have marketed, send information to these renters' apartments just to get their feedback, even if it was anonymous?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a valid point, and we have programs in the housing element to do exactly that, to do that outreach and to start getting more of the renter voice included in this. That's part of the work plan that's laid out in the element.
But that's after we move this forward?
It is after you move this forward, although it could start sooner than that. It could start now.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I want to say, as I'm listening to the voices in the community from the housing providers, landlords, I don't know what language we're using for this, but I do want to thank them for their time. Thank you for the emails that you sent over. It was a lot, and it was a good read, very knowledgeable, very informative to me to get your perspective. But there are good landlords, housing providers, and I appreciate those that actually do care during this pandemic. I know one in particular that when their tenant lost their jobs, they picked up that rental fee so that person or persons can be housed. So there are good housing providers out there. But what I think the document is what we're trying to convey is we're trying to target the bad ones, the ones that are taking advantage of the moratorium that was in place and still charging tenants $50 or more for late fees, right? We're targeting those that when there's items in the apartment that need to be repaired, the landlords or housing providers are basically tell them you do the repairs, but then you are not able to take that amount off of the rent. So you're suffering a hardship in doing that. And so if we want to look closer and dive deeper, maybe we should change that language to where it's more specific. That way the good housing providers don't feel that, oh, you're attacking me because, I'm doing good, but now I'm having to pay for the others. I know that sounds a bit presumptuous at points because, if this one is all, but I think we just need to write it in a sense that, it does show gratitude for those who do follow the law, who do understand the business, and those that are not and that are taking advantage of tenants. Need to have some type of accountability or enforcement needs to be in place. I attended a recent event based on human sexual trafficking. And one thing that I found was very interesting, or at least pretty sad, that housing providers were taking advantage of their renters by saying, if you provide certain acts, you won't have to pay the rent. I hope that did not happen here in Albany, where we're taking advantage of tenants because we're trying to get financial gain. So those, I think we need to look in that scope of who's not following the law, who's not, taking in consideration that tenants are suffering, whether it's, financially or whatever hardship may be, and that's not working with tenants to get, a financial gain. And so that's all I have to say at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Tiedemann.
Thank you. So first off, I just wanted to thank Jeff and Barry for doing all this work. It's a complicated process with a lot of hoops to jump through. And to some of the issues that were noted in public comment, the last meeting we had, I think the direction that was given was, here's some things we'd like you to work on, and also go into this comment period and respond to the issues that come up. And then we get to address them here and decide whether we like those changes that were made. So I think everything has been done properly so far. I made a lot of my thoughts on this clear in the previous meeting, as I've made my thoughts on housing clear in every meeting. But I think the main point being that this plan needs to go really far, especially because it is a preliminary planning document. It's the first step of a long process. And so I understand the folks that are saying that they wish that this was going, with something stronger of actually instituting things. I hope that we get there. I think we will get there. And I think that's part of the process. And this is the first step of doing so that we need to get out of the way. So with all that said, I won't really be happy with this plan until we go at least as far as we did in the original draft, which we saw about a month ago. And I think it's good that we got this input, but I don't want that input to result in us taking a lot of options off the table, especially when those options are there for a really good reason. As some commenters noted, as I think we have in the staff report and in the housing element, the housing element has to, the process has requirements that we talk to advocacy organizations on the side of tenants and affirmatively further fair housing. That's a requirement in the process, which is there because it's an explicit recognition of the difficulty tenants have faced locally on a statewide basis, on a federal level, and a recognition of the inaction and deck being stacked against tenants historically. And that's really, really very important. And so it makes sense that we engaged with Albany Thrives Together, that we have really taken pains to try and affirmably further fair housing, and that's a requirement we have to fill. I don't think HCD will, we're not going to get a draft back with no comments, and I think they'll probably want something stronger than what we've got right now. And nowhere is it more vital to have this affirmatively furthering fair housing requirements than here in a town where homes sell, uniformly for over $1 million at this point, and where in this area we're in the worst rental market in the country, for tenants at least. So I it's hard to see a better place for this sort of work to take place. And to address sort of the counterclaim that we saw in a lot of comments from landlords, that this sort of tips the scale towards tenants, I think that ignores the context of, that this is a really tough rental market where we know that rents are way over what they should be. I think it ignores the history that, we have not addressed the need for affordable housing in many years in this country, and especially in this region. And it ignores the institutional advantage that one side is given here. Some commenters mentioned this, and it's really true of just when one side controls access to housing and owns property and the other side needs housing, there's a architectural advantage built into the system just with how our economic system works. So given all that, it's really impossible for me to justify removing protections because we're being asked to protect investments over disadvantaged people. And I think that's really the trade-off that we're looking at for landlords, owning housing and renting it out is an investment. I think one of our commenters basically said that in saying it's a business. Protecting that investment is not what I think we are here for. It's definitely not what I'm on council for, especially when the other side is disadvantaged people who need a place to live. This is housing provision should not be a business like any other because it's a human right. It's a necessity. So just treating it like an ordinary business, I don't think works. So with all that in mind, I think at minimum, we should bring back the TOPA proposal, and we should bring back the considerations going above and beyond AB 1482. I think a lot of the other language changes, are okay. Most of them are tertiary. They don't change the big stuff. I think we need to bring back those at the very least. And honestly, I would just default this back to the version we saw, plus the box on explaining AB 1482.
Thank you. Councilor McQuaid. You are on mute.
Time for that. Okay, thank you. To a great extent, I agree with the vice mayor. I do have a little bit of an issue to say providing housing is not a business, because it is a business, and the larger problem is going to need to be solved on a federal level. And I don't want to get into that right now. We'd spend all night talking about it. But I don't think it's fair to say it's not a business, because for some people it is. But let me step back a minute. I want to remember to thank everybody for their comments. We read them all, answered most of them. Thank you to staff for your work. Mr. Miller, again, thank you. I think we need to remember that this is a framework for going forward, and there are not going to be really, really specific policies drawn out to the nth degree in the housing element. It's a framework, and we need to work together with everyone. And I don't want to say both sides. I don't think it is both sides. I think there's a lot of commonality in both the housing providers and the tenants and what is needed. So I'm not too concerned with most of the changes that came in. There's still a lot of language about considering and discussing, and that's kind of, I think, where this belongs. So that doesn't bother me. And I know a lot of housing providers and tenants do work together, and I think it's the role of the city to encourage that and to enhance those relationships while we ensure that no one is left behind, that everyone has their needs met. I would like to keep exploring the feasibility of TOPA. I think exploring the feasibility is good language. It doesn't tie us to it. It doesn't throw it out. Let's look at it. I don't think we have a full understanding of what that means. So I would like to leave that in there. It was also brought up that the rent review should be changed a little bit. The language should be required, non-binding, conciliation, mediation. I think that's a more accurate phrase than perhaps what is in there. I think that's it. Just to remember that this is a framework for people working together to provide housing for all types of, all people to come here. And I think that's it for me for right now.
Thank you. Councilmember Nason, you care to go, or, oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Gary.
Yeah, what is the deadline to submit this draft?
So working backwards from the deadline to adopt the draft, which is January 31st, 2023. For all intents and purposes, the deadline is more, it's kind of now, because to get this into the state and then give them 90 days to comment on it, and then give us time to respond to their comments, bring it to the Planning Commission for a public hearing, and bring it to the council for a public hearing. That's December and January. So we'd get the comments from the state back around December 10th.
Are they granting any extensions to any?
They're not granting extensions per se, but if you adopt the document after January 31st, there's no immediate penalty to you. There's 120 days where they give you some extra time to, but that's mostly to get certified by the state, not to fine tune your draft. So.
And I believe Mr. Pilch stated that this draft that we have before, so this language, it did not go through the planning and zoning before today. Is that correct, or did I hear incorrectly?
No, it did not. It was just drafted this week in response to the deadline of, which was actually last Monday.
And do you know why that didn't happen? Like, was there any reason why it didn't?
Well, I can address that, Councilmember Gary. The commission hasn't had a meeting. There was during the August recess, we didn't have commission meetings. We'll certainly update the commission at their meeting next week. But we felt like it was important to get these comments back to the council as requested first.
So do you think the probably the best approach would probably just send this to us in October? I mean, at least to have, just to follow the procedure. It went to them, first, they worked on it, we got it. Would have been ideal to have them review it and do the work that they needed to do and present it probably in our first meeting in October to get it pushed through.
If you're asking what the ideal outcome, from my perspective, the ideal outcome would be that the council provides some direction one way or the other on the issues that you've heard about today, and we get it to the state. If it's the council's desire that we send it back to the commission first, we're more than happy to do that. There could be schedule consequences later on, and we'll deal with that if that in fact plays out that way. I think these are pretty high level policy decisions, and I think this is probably something that really does land in the council's lap for better or worse. I think this is where you need to give direction to your commission, and if you want to maybe give them some general direction and have them fine tune it, that's great. But I think we really need your input this evening.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you.
I will offer my recollection is that the council asked staff or directed staff to bring back this item at this meeting. So yeah, this is a difficult issue. I see it is created in part because of the strictures that our society collectively has put on housing creation. And because of those strictures now, there is an appetite to putting strictures on private property owners. which makes them in some sense responsible for our society's failure. So from an ethical perspective, I find it very difficult. On to take some of these items that were in the original untracked change that we considered on the 26th is just cause. I mean, so there, my understanding there is just cause eviction provision in state law now. Is there a sense that there's a gap there that isn't covered? I don't know if you could speak to that. And obviously something that if it's kept in, we would study more in the future, but I'm kind of curious at this point.
Yeah, I think the gap that was pointed out by the tenant advocacy groups is that the remedy for just cause eviction or eviction without cause is to go to the state court under AB 1482, which is a complicated process for a tenant and not as accessible as doing this at a local level if there was a local limit on just cause. And there are a number of other cities that have adopted just cause for eviction ordinances that deal specifically with that issue at the local level. That's say something similar to the state, but locally.
Yeah, thank you. So my understanding is currently it's a state law, so it would have to be adjudicated in state court. If a local just cause ordinance, presumably an ordinance was passed, then what would be the venue by which would be adjudicated?
I don't know the local venue for that. That's maybe an attorney question.
Okay.
I'd have to look into that, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, on that, I am struggling with the ethical issue here on both sides, which does have tenants in the middle. So one of the ideas that was brought up was we collectively as a society created this situation, so it should be on us as a society to provide the difference in cost between rent and say 30% of income. However, to my thin knowledge, there is a very small program that does that, but nowhere near meets the need. Housing vouchers, but my understanding is also that I'm going to call them rental providers to try to strike the middle. That some to many rental providers don't accept those, although my understanding is also that it's illegal not to accept them. So I don't know if Mr. Miller or Director Vaughn could speak to that.
It is illegal to discriminate based on source of income under SB 329. So there is, you cannot advertise a property as being no Section 8 and so forth.
Right, but there's a lot that can go on in the application process. So I think that goes to the testing,
right?
Which we don't have any data regarding. So we're somewhat flying blind here. Yes, Vice Mayor Tiedemann.
Mayor, I don't want to interrupt your line of questioning, but your past you do bring up a sort of issue that I think it's good to call out and say a little bit more bluntly that our staff is probably going to say, of at least my read of things, is that AB 1482, other state laws, often what housing advocacy folks will tell you is that they're kind of toothless a lot of the time, and don't have enough enforcement power to really back up things like just cause, or things like, making it illegal to reject Section 8, because we know that these things still happen. And like we just discussed, it's onerous to go through the process to correct that using the state process. I think that means that we should view those sorts of laws as sort of a baseline slash, something that we should try and go above. If the state's trying to, get in there and provide a backstop to some extent, because they can't be sure that everyone will take the steps that are probably necessary. But that's a decision that we should make.
Yeah, so I could ask you, you use the phrase housing is a human right, which I don't really understand. I mean, I understand rights as something that is inalienable to a person as opposed to something that society is required to provide to the person in terms of material goods. So I'm wondering if you could expand on that and if you could discuss your thoughts on this sort of ethical dilemma that our society and maybe you don't agree, but our society is largely based on private property rights. But then, of course, we've used those rights to prevent the production of housing. So now we're in this situation that we have created, and we're contemplating putting the burden on private property owners.
Yeah, I'll try and just discuss that without going into a rant about moral philosophy, which is a little bit of a danger. I would say that housing is a human right because it is a basic need that people need to essentially survive and thrive. If we get really technical, I think it's basically at the base of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, of in order to be a person who is active in society, who is healthy, who is getting by, you need shelter. And we are based on private property as a society. Whether we should be based on private property as a society is the thing we could talk about for hours, and I encourage anyone in any of our attendees who want to talk about it with me to email me. But I'd say two reasons of it's a basic thing that people need, and so if it's not being provided, it is a failure of society to do so, and one that we should correct. And as government, I think that is our role of correcting those societal ills, even if they happen because of the market. The market is a creation of also our society and our governmental relations. And also, as I mentioned, as I think has been mentioned by others, the reason we are in this mess is partly due to decisions made by government in the past. And we are not that same government, but we are in some means culpable for what they've done, or culpable for at least trying to actively fix those issues. So given all that, I think, tenant protections, things that protect housing, are really ethically justified.
Yeah, I guess I don't. I mean, to me, it seems like it's ethically government's responsibility to correct the problem rather than individual property owners, and that's where I get tripped up. Councilmember Nason.
Maybe this philosophical discussion would be a good place for me to jump in and say, wait, we're a really little town that's part of a Bay Area and national and even global market. I mean, this issue of housing prices becoming unattainable is a problem really of democracy, because we have so many laws and so many structures designed to protect the inners from the outers. We have protections for single-family homeowners. We have protections for people who are already tenants. There is nothing that we can pass that is going to make it affordable for every person who would like to live in Albany on a third of their income to do so. That's not realistic. I think that what we should be talking about here is what we can really practically accomplish as a small city. And if we try to say, well, we're going to do every single thing that Oakland does, we're going to do all that, it's just not realistic. It's not really going to happen. It's going to upset the housing providers without actually delivering for the tenants. So I'm comfortable with the draft as it is. I think I said the same thing about TOPA, that we can say we're going to analyze TOPA, and maybe we do put our staff to work working on understanding TOPA and coming up with a proposal to do it. I just don't believe that a program that complex is going to actually be implemented in Albany. Now, as far as tenant protections, I've been a tenant. I led a rent strike in Albany in a building that where I rented an apartment on Marin Avenue. I had another serious landlord-tenant dispute in a different apartment in Albany on Jackson. I do recognize, and with all respect to Councilmember McQuaid's talking about how many people do have really good relationships with housing providers, it is an inherently fraught relationship in which there are profound interests that are clashing. What I would like to see us do is work towards a situation in which we encourage, I think the best thing that Albany can do is to work towards a situation where small owners of property, single family homes or apartments, are incentivized to provide more housing, because the more housing we provide, the more people can move into Albany at whatever price they can pay within the market, and more people who want to be here can move here. But I think that has to be balanced. That is necessarily going to involve transitions. You're going to have some of the dilapidated, say someone wants to tear down a dilapidated single family home and build a fourplex. That's a social good. But there may already be a tenant in that single family home, and that's not a good thing from their perspective. And I think that we have to provide assistance to them to be able to make the transition in a way that works for them. So I say, the plan for me works as it is. There's a lot of work to be done, but I would like to see us focus on making it more possible for property owners to develop more housing. And I don't just mean the big ones on San Pablo Avenue that have hundreds or even dozens of units, but really the much smaller ones where you have a house or two, maybe two houses next to each other, and you could actually build 8 units or more on that land. But that any existing tenants have got to be transitioned in a fair, just way, and not handed a 30-day notice.
Vice Martina?
I have a couple thoughts on that. I agree with the start of, this is a regional, state, federal level issue, but it's also a local issue. And we can't, as Albany, correct everything that has created the housing crisis in California. But we can take steps to do our part to do so. And I think that's what these housing elements exist for. That's why we have regional housing needs assessments, because for better or worse, our system has put it in the hands of local government often to decide how much housing gets built and what are the rules that govern that housing. We don't have sole power over it. The state can often take away that power, as they've threatened to do every year at this point, because I think cities aren't doing enough. But saying that we can't solve it completely is not saying that we should not take these actions about it. We should still take these actions because they are what we can do to do our part of alleviating this larger issue. I would also, on Mayor, your original question of, this, how does our responsibility as government relate to us regulating what business owners can do? I would say that we do that all the time in every level of our government, because we have made the market indispensable to how we do everything in this country. And so if we have things we'd like to have happen about our society, or historical ills we'd like to correct, that involves getting involved in the market. And that's a thing that we do through regulation, through trying to encourage good business practices, to have programs that help these concerns. And in this case, I think it's especially important because, like some commenters pointed out, this is a really hard to balance relationship when one person owns property and the other person needs a place to live and does not, usually it does not have the financial means to own property. One of those people there has just a huge advantage on the other group due to the financial privilege that they have of owning property, especially around here. So is it, in an ideal world, would we solve this through government action of hugely expanding Section 8 and a bunch of other programs? Absolutely. If I were in charge of HUD, we'd be doing that today. Unfortunately, I'm not in charge of HUD. I'm the vice mayor of Albany, where we don't have control of what HUD does. And this is what is the bit we can do. One final thing that I was trying to remember from what Councilmember Nason said is it is incumbent on us to increase housing on offer, to increase rental housing stock. That's not really what's at issue here. We have no real red line changes from that part of the housing element. These are all about the rental protection parts, which are related but different issues and require different solutions. We should encourage the building of housing all over the place and the creation of affordable housing. But what we're talking about now is how we keep people in Albany who would be displaced otherwise, is how we make it so that people can afford the rents that are on offer here, or that they are not taken advantage of, or that they are not at an imbalance because of the power differential here. So it's not an either or. We need the rental protections because they'll help prevent displacement and people going into the streets and people being evicted, and give the chance to, with TOPA, have affordable housing created. We also need the programs that increase supply. And specifically, on TOPA, Councilmember Nason's points are a great reason why I think it's important to have it in here so we can actually explore it and say, is this feasible for us? How would it work? Which is exactly what this plan is all about, is saying, what's the upside here? Can we make it work for Albany?
Councilmember Nason.
Yeah, I think we're in agreement on a lot of points, including the problem of power imbalance. But I do feel that I see little to be gained from what I think would be a massive amount of work for staff to come up with a really comprehensive analysis of TOPA. I think there are a host of reasons for Albany to be a slow adapter on that type of program. It is massively complex. Neither Berkeley nor Richmond has yet embraced and implement. Embracing and implementing are two very different things. Trying to make Albany the tip of the spear on a very complex and legally complex issue like that is, to me, I don't see that helping tenants. I do see coming up with looking at the really kind of practical questions, like what if a landlord of a rundown single family home would actually like to tear it down and build 2 or 4 units. But we have a tenant living there. That's their home. This is not a question where the answer is immediately obvious. And I think it is the kind of question where if we can come up with humane, local, helpful solutions, we could actually advance housing production at the smaller level, and probably more housing innovation too. Not just the great big buildings, the residential over retail that we see around Berkeley, but to see smaller units also made available to more people. But that's the kind of thing that I'd like to focus our analysis on, not the larger scale programs like TOPA that I think are probably not really practical for Albany until quite a bit more pioneering has been done by cities with more resources. But I wouldn't fall on my spear to have it, over putting it back in. If people want it analyzed, they think it's going to lead somewhere, they think it's worth the investment of staff time, that's not going to prevent me from voting for this. But I'm satisfied that with it as it is, that it's a practical, it's a more practical approach and probably ultimately a more constructive approach for tenants than the one that we saw last time.
So I'm going to, having had a conversation for a little while, I'm going to propose a way to frame and facilitate, and then I'll go to Director Bonds. We have, let's say, version 1 of Chapter 6 and version 2 of Chapter 6. I think we can move towards expressing support for one or the other. I'm for instance, not entirely clear, Councilmember Nason, and I'm not asking you to say now. I want to go to Director Bond, which version you support, or some mix and match between the two. So that might help us to move towards a decision. Director Bond.
Thank you, Mayor Jordan. I was going to, this is a fascinating dialogue that you're having, and I think it's a really important one to have. It is, however, the housing element in itself is not the place to do it, in a sense. The housing element is the place to frame it. And it sounds like, Mayor Jordan, you just started to kind of move in that direction. So I will put my hand down and let you continue to guide the conversation.
I always appreciate your help, your professional help. I will note from my decades of advocacy that I don't see, I see items at this planning level as consequential because they do create momentum. So certainly as an advocate, one of the things I would try to do is get items in early, into early plans to create that momentum. So I don't fault anybody who's thinking, trying to advocate now that certain items shouldn't be in the plan. With that, Councilmember Nason, I don't know if you'd be willing to say if it's V1 or V2 or some mix between the two that you have in mind.
No,
okay.
I don't. I mean, I was thinking of this in terms of, is this good? And my reaction was, yeah, this I can go forward with this version. But I'd be happy to consider somebody else's mix and match.
Just to be clear, this version, by this version, you mean the red line version?
I mean the one that's before us to send in, yeah.
Okay, all right. I'm not sure. I've lost track of the staff recommendation. The staff recommendation specific to one recommendation. And was that version 2? I apologize. Mr. Miller.
Yeah, if I may, the staff recommendation was to just ask you to consider the alternate language that we had prepared and give you the option of selecting that if you felt it was a better reflection of sort of the sense of the council. And what I'm taking away, if I may chime in on this, is there's a lot of desire among some council members to hold on to that language that was in the first draft. But what was missing from the first draft that I think makes the second version better is that commitment to engaging the housing providers in the discussion and the dialogue, and to make it, just to create that balance that wasn't in the first draft. So it would essentially be a hybrid that restores those bullet points in that language, but with that additional language about making it a balanced discussion. You could consider that as an option.
Thank you. I think, well, Councilmember McQuaid.
Thank you. And I think Mr. Miller sort of summarized, I think what I'm thinking, that there's not really a whole lot of difference between the two. And looking at it, we're still talking about exploring the feasibility of non-discrimination, anti-harassment to go beyond the state and federal law. So we're not throwing that out. It's still there. It's just being sure there's dialogue to it. And I think without some sort of dialogue between providers and tenants and tenant organizations, it's bound to fail. And, dialogue doesn't mean everybody gets what they want, but I think it's an important piece. And this, as I think we've said before, this doesn't solve the problem. This is just a framework to take a step forward. So I'm liking this one. I still would like to put the TOPA in. And again, it's exploring the feasibility. It's not saying we'll do it, but let's look at it. Let's see if we can do it. Let's see, maybe working, they talked about with an adjoining city. I think it's worth having it in there. I think I would not like to see us take it out. So I guess the answer to your question is I'm supporting what's before us tonight, including TOPA.
Vice Mayor Tiedemann.
So the version I propose very briefly at the start and would, if it were the time, make a motion in support of, though I'm not right now, would be similar to what Councilmember McQuaid has said of, given my druthers, I would revert totally to the previous version with a couple minor edits, but I think in the spirit of compromise, I think the thing we could easily do is just reinsert the TOPA program exploration on page 44 of the red line version we've been given. And I would say reinsert the bullet points on page 42 that talk about just cause eviction, non-discrimination, all of those sorts of things, which I think are important to have in there to set the goals of sort of what specifically we can consider and what protections are sort of possible and on the table, though not exhaustive. And I think sort of necessary to have those to really be in sync with the goal of affirmatively furthering fair housing.
I can live with all that. I don't really agree with putting TOPA back in, and I don't, I am deeply concerned about any tenant protections that, I think any tenant protections that are developed need to be very carefully crafted to be sure that they are not yet another way of protecting people who have successfully achieved housing in Albany over against other people who would like to move into Albany, but who would have to move into new housing in order to there would have to be more housing on the market for them to be able to participate. So I think there are difficult things to be done, but I can live with what you propose.
Vice Mayor Tiedemann.
With that all said, I would like to make a motion. Okay, I would move that we authorize submittal of the working draft housing element to the California Department of Housing Community Development with the re-addition of expiration of the TOPA program and the re-addition of the bullet points specifying additional tenant protections.
Is there a second to that motion? Oh, Councilmember McQuaid.
Thank you. If I may, I'd like to just ask Vice Mayor Tiedemann a question, just to make sure I'm totally clear. So Vice Mayor, you're adding the bullet points on page 42. Are you changing anything in the description as it's been redlined?
There may need to be minor language changes to make that actually read how it should, in English. But I'm happy to leave that exact, that inconsequential and wording to staff. I wouldn't be changing any of the other substantive things about what we've heard from landlords or their involvement in the process.
So you're keeping them in the process?
Yep, sure.
Okay, with that in mind, I'm happy to second.
I will make a substitute motion to the same, but removing the TOPA provision. I agree with Councilmember Nason on her perspective of that. And also adding the correction that I believe it says currently, and this was brought up in a comment to us. I think it might be a little behind where the San Pablo specific plan landed on parking. It makes a reference to a minimum parking requirement of half a parking space for residents. So I think that needs to be corrected. Is there a second?
Question. Once says for, will this document come back before it goes? Or we're completely done with this draft?
Speaking for the substitute motion, which I think has been seconded. I think Councilmember Nason might have seconded it. The intent is that this would be it, and it would be approved to be submitted. And we could take further changes when it comes back, but this would be approval to submit it to HCD. Vice Mayor Teeman?
Yeah, just speaking for my read of the process, with which Jeff, feel free to chime in. We're sending it for comments for HCD. We would see it again once we get back those comments and start responding to them. So it wouldn't be the final time we see the housing element. It would just be us saying this version is okay to get preliminary comments from HCD on. I see Jeff sort of nodding.
Yes, Councilmember to Vice Mayor Tiedemann, you're absolutely right. This is an interim step, an important one, but an interim step. You'll see it. Planning and Zoning Commission will see it by statute at least once, but as many times as you want in the coming months.
So to be clear, so Planning and Zoning Commission will receive it after we get direction from the state. Is that what you're stating?
That's correct. By law, this Planning and Zoning Commission is required to make a recommendation to you. So the sequence that we had in mind is a variety of public engagement of the different types over the next few months. Make some edits, staff would, and then Barry and staff will make some edits as we see would be appropriate. Present that first to the Planning and Zoning Commission for their review and comments and recommendation. And we'll do that as many meetings as they need to reach a recommendation, and then bring it to you for final approval for submittal to the state for certification.
Okay.
Councilmember McQuaid.
Thank you. One thing that I mentioned earlier, and I don't know if it got really picked up in either of the motions, is the rent review, changing it to required non-binding conciliation mediation. Is that a change that either of the motion makers would be willing to accept?
Yeah, I'm happy to have that as a friendly amendment.
Mayor Jordan, are you happy with that?
Anyway, so the proposed change is to change it to binding?
Required non-binding conciliation mediation, which is really what it is. I think the language that it has right now is a little bit weaker.
Yeah, I think currently the rent provider can, I think they could say thanks, no thanks under the current language. So yeah, I support that.
Okay.
Friendly amendment. To put some concept out there of how this language could be adjusted is if the bullets are going back in as currently the lead into that was the program includes a comprehensive evaluation of, then there's considerable verbiage after that. I think that can be eliminated with the last sentence being moved down to the paragraph below would be my proposal, which keeps in the rental provider being at the table. So with that, unless there's any other discussion.
Well, wait just a second. If you're taking out, are you taking out that whole paragraph? The program includes comprehensive evaluation. You're taking out the whole rest of that paragraph?
So
if I may, can you put that up so I can see?
Yeah,
we
sure.
Can see and the public can see.
Good suggestion. Thank you. And,
Because that was what I was asking the vice mayor if he was doing.
right. So my suggestion is that, you know, these bullets, if you keep this language in, it's duplicative of these bullets. So I think you basically leave out the red line up to tenant landlord organizations have indicated access to legal aid. That could go below the bullets, and the rest of this could go away.
Essentially, those two sentences.
Yeah, so from here, I can't highlight it in this particular view, I don't think.
From any gaps or deficiencies until fair housing law.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is about what I was figuring would happen, and what I tried to say as I leave it to staff to figure out how the English should read good.
You know me in the grass. Yeah. I also really don't want I don't want to leave room for staff to potentially get critiqued if I can help it. So that's why I'm diving into this grass level detail. So that is the motion. I'll restate it. Moved by myself, seconded by Councilmember Nason, to take version 2, this version that is in front of us here, add back in this list of bullets, remove the language as we just described, move this sentence down to the bottom paragraph, add in the mandatory mediation conciliation, I believe it was the friendly amendment from Councilmember McQuaid. I don't think I missed anything, but if I did, please, please say so.
So quick question, can you restate the mandatory? Are you saying that tenants and landlords, that it'll be mandatory for them to go through this mediation? Thank you for bringing that up, pulling it up further.
Yeah, so this part isn't about the mediation. This is about policy development around these bullet points, you know, the exploration of each of these policy suggestions. I believe the mandatory conciliation mediation provision that Councilmember McQuaid was referring to was the existing rent review process. Councilmember McQuaid, do I have that correctly, or?
Right, in the document, I believe it says mandatory mediation, but the city website refers to it as a non-binding conciliation mediation. So it's simply to match our language on the website with the housing element.
Okay, is that's in program 5C, fee C, I presume?
I think so.
Which regards the rent review.
Which is on 640. I'm assuming essentially what we'd be changing, if we go up right there, is essentially just saying continue the rent review, and you'd be changing the language of mandatory mediation program to mandatory non-binding mediation program.
Correct.
Great.
Got it. All right, any more discussion? I think we're actually ready to take a vote on the substitute motion. City Clerk.
Vice Mayor Tiedemann?
No.
Councilmember Gary?
No.
Mayor Jordan?
Yes.
Councilmember McQuaid?
No.
And Councilmember Nason?
Yes.
The motion failed.
So now we go to the primary motion. Yes, Councilmember Gary. Councilmember Gary?
No, go ahead. I'm sorry. I thought you were.
Oh, okay. So now we go to the primary motion, which is made by Vice Mayor Tiedemann. Vice Mayor, I don't know if you want to restate it and potentially adopt some of what was just done in the substitute motion.
Yeah, I think I accepted the friendly amendment about the mandatory program. So let me try and restate it all. So the motion is that we authorize the working draft housing element to be submitted to the California Department of Housing and Community Development with the re-addition of the possible TOPA program, the change to the language of Program 5C to identify the mediation program as mandatory non-binding, as well as add back the specific bullet points on tenant protections, and make the associated cuts to repetitive language in Program 5D. I think that caught everything, yes?
I believe so.
Is there any chance I could talk you into leaving the other language in there with perhaps a phrase of as shown below after non-discrimination, anti-harassment provisions such as shown below?
I'd be happy with that. You know, I think whichever way we go with it communicates the same intent to me. So I'd be okay with either of those.
I think it's a little more clear when you have both. It kind of, here's the overall thing and here's the specifics.
Okay. Then I'm content with that. Do I need to restate everything again, or can we?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, good.
I'll save you that. Mr. Miller.
I wanted to confirm that the text box on AB 1482 is acceptable and we should continue to keep that in.
Yes, I don't want to change that at all.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? With that, poll the council, please, clerk, city clerk.
Mayor Jordan,
No.
Councilmember McQuay,
Yes.
Councilmember Nason,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Tiedemann,
Yes.
and Councilmember Gary.
No.
The motion carries.
Very good. Thank you, council, and attendees, and Bill Ward here who sent in information. Much appreciated. With that, we move the meeting along to unfinished. We're still on unfinished business, right? Yep. Okay. Unfinished business. Item number 2. So the restated amendment number 3 to the employment agreement for city manager services. City staff, and maybe this is city attorney, if you could provide us with a report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Jordan. What is before you is a recommendation for the council to adopt resolution 2022-98 to approve the restated amendment number 3 to the employment agreement for city manager services. As you might recall, at your July 5th council meeting, you did approve a resolution to amend the city manager's contract. The purpose of that amendment in part was to increase the base salary by 10%, as well as to provide for a 6-month severance pay upon removal without cause. At the time, prior to July 1 of 2022, the city manager was already receiving a base salary of approximately $213,000. In addition, she was receiving longevity pay and incentive pay that was previously approved by the council in its management and confidential employees benefit booklet. This longevity and incentive pay is also paid to other management employees. However, unfortunately, I had inserted the wrong 10%, wrong base salary into the contract. So the intent for the city manager to receive a 10% increase on her base salary did not come to fruition with the agreement that was approved by the council, and I apologize for that. So what is before you tonight is a correction to the agreement to provide the correct amount, which is $235,021 in base salary. This will provide the 10% increase that the council wanted to effectuate. In addition, we've also included some language to kind of clarify the longevity and incentive pay that has already been approved by the council. Happy to answer any questions. The red lines of what was previously approved are in the staff report, and we're requesting that you approve the resolution that approves the restated Third Amendment to the city manager's contract.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Does the resolution that's in front of us, because I see it in the findings that in the previous resolution, it was to take effect on July 1st. I haven't really followed the thread through. I see it's not in the resolve of this resolution, but that might be stated in the agreement. I apologize, I didn't follow the thread into the agreement. Would that July 1st start date still obtain?
That's correct, Mayor. It's in the very beginning of the agreement. It says that it's effective July 1. So it will, it'll have the same effective date.
Thank you. Not seeing any council members personally indicating they want to comment. Go to the public. One attendee has their hand raised. If you could please admit them. Welcome back.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just wondering how many days or how many months of vacation pay is it that the city manager gets per year? And also, I remember not too many years ago, I think the city manager was getting paid $197,000, $203,000, something like that. And now it's up to $235,000. That's at least a 20% increase in a matter of 1 to 2 years. So it's not really a 10%. I mean, what does that come down to per hour? I know on the city's website, the police chief gets paid, I think it's $101 or something around there. The fire chief gets paid $99 or $102. So now when we do the city's manager's pay rate per hour, what does that come down to per hour? 115. It's kind of curious what it is per hour. And, you know, the $235,000, that's a $35,000 increase within a matter of a couple of years. And also, what staff put this on the agenda and recommended this? Is that the city attorney that recommend this? I mean, it sounds like most obviously, but that's just speculation, right? So the important things are $235,000 is $35,000 increase in a matter of a couple of years. And also, what is the amount of vacation days? Is it a month? Is it 2 months? 30, 60 days? And also, here we go again, last agenda item, you know, to give the city manager a raise again. And I wonder how many public attendees are still on here after that lengthy, you know, last agenda item. But how many public attendees are still here, Mayor? Thank you for your time.
Thank you. There's 16 according to the count. City attorney, I don't know if you have the paid time off days per year, your availability.
I don't have the exact amount. It's the same that other employees receive, and there is no change. This amendment has no change to that.
Thank you. Yeah, and I will offer this is not a 20% increase. This is a 10% increase for this year, and the increase last year was certainly not 10%. So it's essentially a cleanup measure. I will re-express some of my reasons for this, since this is in front of us again. The city manager was found by comparison.
Mayor, we do have one more public comment.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Make sure you know.
Yeah, thank you. City clerk, could you please admit? Thank you. Welcome.
Thanks. Yeah, there's a weird thing that happens is if my hand goes, if I get the unmute button and then somebody starts talking and then I don't unmute because you're talking, and then the system treats me as if I've already spoken. And this happened last time when I had to go down to my other computer and try to get on. So it's a weird little glitch. I don't know what could be done about it. This time I tried lowering my hand and raising it again to see if that would work. Just tell you there's a glitch. So what I wanted to say is I think it's too much money, but I know that's not really what you're voting on. It sounds like there was just a miswording of it. But I think for the sake of the public, it would be important to clarify, to just maybe explain what the increases in pay have been over the last several years, the steps that the city manager has received, and also to point out that she also received an increase in paid administrative leave that went up quite a bit, like a year or two ago. I can't remember when it was. And I think it would be great the public could understand what all the benefits are that she's getting, because she gets paid a lot, but also gets a ton of paid time off also. So just whatever it's called. And I just find it to be a lot. So I think it would be good if the public really knew what was going on. Thank you.
So working from my memory, last year, the city manager received no specific raise that was different than what unrepresented staff received. And my recollection is unrepresented staff, I can't recall if the only change that occurred was the addition of a sixth step or a fifth step, but there was no city manager specific raise last year. My reasons for supporting this increase in compensation, as I stated before, was a comparison of compensation for city managers in the area. Found that the Albany city manager was the least compensated, which I did not find in any way justified. Pretty much the opposite in terms of performance. And my metric for performance was progress on the strategic plan goals that the council adopted, being of its current term. And at not even the halfway point, there have been substantial progress on many of the items. Whereas I've seen prior city managers not even score progress even after at the end of the strategic plan period. So that's my recollection of some of the reasons that I felt that this increase in compensation was warranted. Vice Mayor Tiedemann.
Yeah, City Attorney, thank you for bringing this back. I don't think it's necessary to get really much into the weeds on this one, seeing as we discussed this, the substantive part of this at length. This is, to me, a pretty pro forma administrative correction due to a mistake, which is completely understandable. I'd be lying if I said that I had never put a wrong number in a staff report I've written. So with that, if we're approaching time, I'd be happy to make a motion.
I'll second.
Councilmember Gary.
Thank you so much, Mayor. I think everybody should have an opportunity to say something. I didn't have an opportunity last time because I got cut off for some reason on Zoom to express my concerns. You know, I do believe that everyone that does the work do need to get a raise, and I'm all for raises. I guess my only concern, as I stated before, was that there was no measurables. You stated that you measured her performance, the city manager's performance, based on the strategic plan. But again, if something was put in place where we can see over the past years what the strategic plan looks like, what was accomplished, what's not accomplished, set goals for the city manager, I think that would, you know, suffice for what Ms. Julie was talking about, letting the public know, you know, this is why. And so there's not so many questions. So we did try to vote to have something set up so we can work on that, because we want to make sure that we're in compliance, especially when it comes to audit, and other cities are doing the same thing. Is basically that's how they measure their city manager's appointment and raise. So again, this is not personal. I'm just asking that there be some level of accountability. That way we're able to measure how and when and what has transpired in order to produce a raise. So those are my thoughts. And if you're ready to do your vote, go ahead.
Vice Mayor Tiedemann.
I just wanted to clarify, I did not mean to end discussion there. I was saying I was ready to make a motion, but I was not attempting to make one, though I appreciate Councilmember McQuaid's quick seconding. So if we are ready, I will make a motion now, which would be that I move that council adopt resolution number 2022-98.
No, I'll still second.
Been moved and seconded to approve the resolution. Not seeing any other expressions of interest in discussion. City Clerk, please poll the council.
Councilmember Gary?
No.
Mayor Jordan?
Yes.
Councilmember McQuaid?
Yes.
Councilmember Nason?
Yes.
And Vice Mayor Tiedemann?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you, City Clerk. And if I can find my way back to my notes. That brings us to, well, council subcommittee reports, council member reports. I don't know that we have any of those, but perhaps we do. I know none of the bodies that I'm served on have met in the last month. I see Councilmember McQuaid has her hand raised. You're on mute.
I perhaps drew the short straw because we did meet. The Housing Authority took July off, so we did meet in August. And there was also a resource fair for the participants in the FSS program. East Bay Division had a meeting, participated in a national night out. I attended the National League of Cities Women in Municipal Government Conference in Sacramento. And we've begun getting a little more serious about planning for United Against Hate Week. And that's it for me right now.
Thank you. Councilmember Nason.
Yeah, I've had some miscellaneous activities like National Night Out and so forth, but just one that is somewhat of some significance, I think. The measures B and BB, which were countywide transportation measures that provide significant funding for cities throughout Alameda County, including Albany, included a provision to have an independent watchdog commission. And the independent watchdog commission on those bond measures has identified failure to achieve pavement condition index metrics as a serious concern. And they are asking for commission action to be sure to help cities that are failing to meet the standard to come into line. And Albany is one of those cities. So it is something that I think that we as a council need to, I've talked about it before. I talk about it a lot, but I think we need to look at Albany's paving as we do have significant problems with our PCI, although I do also understand that we may be headed in the right direction when we get the report at the end of the year. But it is something I think the council should be aware of.
Thank you. May I ask, what is the PCI target?
60. Below 60, you drop the problem is this. The bonds were essentially a promise to the taxpayers that the funds would be spent efficiently. If your PCI falls too far, it's a little bit like, not changing the oil in your car. If you don't do your routine maintenance and keep things up to a certain level, when you fall below that 60, you are much more likely to start having a lot more deterioration a lot more quickly. And it becomes more expensive. Maintenance actually becomes more expensive because of the failure to maintain. You kind of are entering, when you fall below 60, you're really kind of entering into a vicious cycle. So it's thought to be part of your kind of commitment to the taxpayers to make sure that you are not incurring a lot of liabilities unnecessarily, basically that you're not wasting money. And when you fall below 60, you are in great danger of wasting taxpayer dollars, as well as I think it's important to realize there are equity concerns around the damage that bad roads do to vehicles, and especially the more vulnerable vehicles of people with lower incomes. There's kind of an invisible tax that we level on low-income drivers when we fail to maintain our streets and roads. So we have a significant issue there that hopefully we're coming into compliance, but right now we're not, and we need to keep an eye on this.
Thank you. And if we were just conversing together, I wouldn't bring this in, but because people are listening, I just want to be clear to my understanding these are sales tax measures rather than bonds. But do I have that incorrect, that they're bonds?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Did I say bonds? I should not have said that. That
I mean,
sounds,
that's,
yes.
I figured you knew that, but I know there's people listening, so I just like
Yeah.
to keep it clear.
No,
yeah, so it's
you're-
really a pay as you go.
Appreciate the correction. Thank you.
Yeah, and the reason I bring that up is because the idea of using bonds to pave streets just drives me crazy.
Yeah, I agree with that.
There's a neighboring city.
But what drives me even crazier is the idea of spending money kind of unnecessarily because of letting our streets deteriorate to the point that it becomes more expensive to fix them than it otherwise would be. And it also drives me a little bit crazy to impose those kinds of costs on drivers who may find it very expensive to get their cars fixed because we've let the roads deteriorate so badly.
I concur. Thanks. Did anybody else have any meetings of note to report? All right, seeing none, that takes us to the next item, which is future agenda items. Councilmember Nason.
Oh, I was going to defer to Councilmember Gary.
Very kind. Councilmember Gary.
Thank you, Councilmember Nason. I think we need to bring the SEJC item that Councilmember Nason was referring to. We need to do some type of, if we're going to make some changes to the municipal code as far as who's nominating when there's vacancies. I think a discussion about the SEJC needs to happen because I know Councilmember Nason has brought that up several times. So I don't know if you want to put that on the next agenda, if we're going to wait until after the elections for the new bodies to come on and we make that decision. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, I think in light of the outcome of the motion with regard to the cross, I think it's important that we think about some interim solution from the removal of the cross that would allow gatherings. I think it should be clear that nobody, the removal of the cross does not by any means mean that Christians who desire to hold services on the Hill cannot do so, that we have a solution in place that will allow them, people, if they are interested, to return to the older tradition of bringing a cross to the park and holding a service that way, while also allowing other members of other faiths or of no faith to have an equal non-discriminatory opportunity also to use the site for whatever purposes, for purposes of gathering. I would not like to see Christmas come around and people want to hold a service on the Hill and think that somehow the city does not permit them or does not let them do that. So I'd like to talk about an interim solution. And I'd also like to have us talk a little bit about a longer term solution. There was some discussion in past years of creating a really nice gathering place where that would be inclusive and non-discriminatory, where any group of people who might want to would have a nice place to hold a gathering on the Hill. And given the sad and strange confluence of the death over the weekend of Thelma Rubin, which I think that Councilmember McQuaid is going to read information about her for us. She was an activist on this issue starting in the 1960s, actually before the present Municipal Cross was actually erected. I would like to suggest, my hope is that one day we might have a really beautiful gathering place dedicated to her memory, if her family agrees. So that's a future agenda item. One kind of quick and one that is longer term.
Thank you. Anybody else? Not seeing any. We will go to adjournment, and we are adjourning in the memory of.
There was a public comment on the last
Oh,
one.
thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks for looking out for me, Vice Mayor. City Clerk, if you could please admit the attendee, and there's 10 attendees currently. And you have 1 minute to comment on future agenda.
Future agenda items is school zones. You know, I've been mentioning school zones to be on a future agenda item for over 10 years. And here goes another 2 years passing with school zones still not implemented. You know, I just am very curious about, you know, cities' involvement in public safety. School zones are very important. And the cars drive so fast, and we're missing out on all these state grants for school zones. So please consider school zones on some agenda. It's been over 10 years, you know, so please do your research on school zones. Berkeley has it. Albany is the only city in Alameda County without school zones, and we got the best school district. And Albany wouldn't have such high property value if it wasn't for the schools.
Thank you. I will note that the council at the beginning of its session did put school zones on the Transportation Commission's work plan. So it's with the Transportation Commission currently. Are there any other comments on future agenda? Not seeing any, we will move to adjournment. Councilmember McQuaid.
Thank you. As Councilmember Nason mentioned, former Mayor Selma Rubin passed away very recently. She was born in Brooklyn, New York on July 27th, 1921. So she recently passed away at age 101. Her father was a master sergeant in the Army, so her formative years she moved from place to place. She attended UC Berkeley and UCSF for nursing, graduating in 1942, and the University of Chicago for her Master's of Science in Nursing Education, graduating in 1949. She also held a Master's of Public Health from UC Berkeley. She served her country in the Navy as a nurse from 1942 to 1946. Thelma worked for 15 years in the Richmond School District as a school public health nurse, where she not only served the schools, but also made home visits. In 1986, she retired as a school public health nurse. Thelma and her husband, Herb, built their home on Albany Hill, where they lived from 1960 until Thelma sold the house in 2015. She was among the founding members of Save the Bay in the 1960s. In the 1960s, she was a member of the Friends of Albany Hill. Thelma served on the city's Civil Service Board for 10 years. She was then appointed to the Planning and Zoning Commission and then the Waterfront Committee. In 1988, she was elected to the City Council and later served as mayor. Several issues that Thelma was very proud of. She was proud to be a member of the Friends of Albany Hill when they created a lawsuit to sue a member of the Albany City Council due to a conflict of interest for selling a piece of land which she sold to the developer of high-rise apartments on Pierce Street. The lawsuit was pro bono, ending up in the California Supreme Court, and Friends of Albany Hill won the suit. This preserved more land on Albany Hill to be part of the park. Thelma was an environmentalist.
Councilmember McQuaid, I hate to interrupt your flow, but I think your papers are scratching on your microphone.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. I just want this to come through clearly.
Thank you.
Please proceed.
Thelma was an environmentalist and enjoyed the outdoors. She was a member of the Sierra Club since 1955. Thelma was a member of the Northern California Seniors Track Club. She participated in masters running for years from her late 50s to her 80s, where she ran at least 2 world games. She then became involved in race walking after she stopped running. Thelma is survived by her 3 children and their spouses. Her eldest daughter, Ruth Rubin, a doctor, and David Coffey, her son, David Rubin, a Superior Court judge, and Todd Stevens, and her youngest daughter, Catherine Rubin, a director of environmental affairs, and Ray Reyes. And I think Councilmember Nason has some words also.
She was a lifelong heroine to me, and to put it in a nutshell, she became engaged in Albany politics at a time when Albany politics was not in good condition, when we had what you might think of as a pretty typical old boys network type of governance, and it had become truly problematical. We had an elected police chief who was notorious in the area, and we had some dealings that, to my mind and to many, many people's minds, were very corrupt. And Thelma played a transformative role in changing Albany, and she and her cohort, of course, not alone. There were quite a number of Albany activists, many, if not most of them, women, who kind of stepped forward and said, no, we need a cleaner, more progressive, more just, and in all ways better Albany. And she really was a wonderful leader for making this city a better place.
Thank you. Let's take a moment of silence. My part, I'll just offer she was a bright light that was one of the first people I met when I came to Albany. Thank you very much. With that, this meeting is adjourned.